This oil rig has a dark secret. I just finished training for oil rig work. My mom thought I was nuts, but honestly, I was excited. Adventure had a new name, and it was called the Kraken. Yeah, that was the actual name of the rig. The helicopter was headed straight for the middle of nowhere. I couldn't help but stick my face against the window. I felt like a kid on his way to Disneyland. Except instead of roller coasters and Mickey Mouse, I was headed to the Gulf of Mexico and getting a huge paycheck out of it. As we started our descent, the rig came into view. It looked like a giant metal monster in the middle of the ocean. It was one of the oldest in the Gulf. The pay was unbelievable. And the recruiter said something about a special bonus if I finished my contract. I signed up as soon as I got my certifications. The moment my boots hit the deck of the Kraken, I was hit with the smell of salty air and oil. The noise was louder than I expected. There was a constant hum of machinery that made the ground vibrate. A couple of guys in different colored vests waited for us. I was told to go to the guy in orange. He looked like he'd been out here for months. He had rough, leathery skin and a slight limp. "What's your name, son?" he asked over the noise. "You can call me Sully, sir." "I'm the new welder," I said. "Sully, huh? Well, welcome to the Kraken. I'm Gene, the head welder around here. Now, the first rule of survival. Always wear this." He handed me a silver pin. Engraved on it was a sea monster attacking a whale. "Put it on. Keep it on you at all times. In the shower, in bed, it doesn't matter, okay? Just make sure you have it," Gene insisted, fixing me with a stare that said, "Don't ask stupid questions." I clipped the pin to my shirt, noticing for the first time that everyone around me wore the same thing. Gene started walking, and I followed, trying to take it all in. The rig was a damn maze. I'd never seen anything so big in my entire life. "So here's the deal. This place is more than nuts and bolts," he began. "There are rules that aren't in the manual, but it's important you follow them if you want to survive the job. So, you remember what rule number 1 is?" Gene raised an eyebrow at me. "Yeah, always wear the pin," I said. The old man nodded with approval. "That's right, rookie. It lets them know you're part of the crew. They can't take you before your time." As we walked, Gene kept the tour going, pointing out parts of the rig I remembered from the safety videos. "Yeah, and over here is the rec center. This is where you spend most of your downtime." We entered through the double doors into a surprisingly cozy area. There was a gym and a snack counter. Next to it was a small library filled with books and board games. Gene opened another door to a room with a few sofas and a large TV. And yes, a ping pong table. So here's the lounge. Got decent internet too. It's all about keeping sane out here. Being cooped up for weeks can mess with your head if you're not very careful, he said. It made sense. You see, people couldn't just leave the rig when the weekend rolled around. The deal was, I'd be on the Kraken for a whole month. After that, they'd fly us back to shore for 3 weeks of vacation. Then it was back to the Kraken until the contract ended. So it was nice to know there were plenty of ways to unwind here. Finally, Gene showed me into the dorm room. It was basic. Bunk bed, a small desk, and a locker for personal items. My roommate was a guy named Clive. He was the only other welder on the rig, but we wouldn't be seeing each other much. We saw each other a lot. With only 2 welders on board, someone always had to be on duty. So we worked around each other's shifts. Before entering the room, I noticed a red metal door at the end of the hall. Gene grabbed me by the arm and pointed at the door. "That's the second rule here, Sully. That door, you never open it, you got that? No matter what you hear." "What's behind it?" I asked. "Restricted area. You don't want to end up like Joe," he said. Gene told me the whole story. It was just before his time at the Kraken. Joe was an odd guy, mostly kept to himself, but he was damn good with the machines. Always had his wrench at the ready. But one day, things got weird for him. He just started packing up all of a sudden. Boots, clothes, even snagged his pillow off his bunk. Everyone was scratching their hands because his leave wasn't due for another week. His friends asked him about it, But the only thing Joe said was that he needed to go home. So they thought it was a family emergency. But instead of heading up to the chopper pad, he walked straight to the red door with all his stuff. Nobody followed him, of course. Even back then, everyone knew the rule about the red door. But management lost their heads. They said anyone who even touched the door would lose their job. And then a day later, oil started leaking out from under it. Lots of it. It came out as a trickle at first. The techs thought there was a system leak. The last thing you want on a rig is an oil spill. But the operators, they just waved it off and told everyone to ignore it. But it kept coming. Soon enough, petroleum filled the hallway. Gene said it got up to an inch deep. It took 3 days before it stopped, and it took the cleanup crew a whole week to mop it up. But the smell lingered for months. Joe's family was told that he fell off the rig and drowned. But one of the cleanup guys found something in the mess. It was Joe's wedding ring, right in the middle of the oil spill. It was pretty clear what I was supposed to get from that story. Rule number 2, don't enter the red door. After dinner, I decided to get some fresh air and headed to the upper deck. The rig operated 24/7. It was still noisy at night, but beyond the Kraken, the Gulf was pretty peaceful. It was miles and miles of endless ocean. As I looked out over the water, something caught my eye. It was too dark to make out clearly at first. Whatever it was, it blocked out the stars. I moved closer to the edge to get a better look. A massive shape moved in the distance. It rose up, and I realized what it was. A tidal wave. It was forming not far from us. The wave grew taller until it was as high as the deck I was standing on. I couldn't say how quickly it was moving, but I knew those things traveled very fast. I turned to run, and I slammed right into Gene. "Well, what's got you running like a scared cat?" he asked. "It's a tsunami or something." "It's huge. Look, it's gonna hit the rig," I replied. "Hey, relax, son. We don't get tsunamis here in the Gulf." "Not like that anyway," Gene said, not bothering to look at all. Instead, he put a calming hand on my shoulder. "But look at it," I insisted. Gene paused, then asked, "Did you look east at the sunset?" "I don't know." "Maybe," I said. "That's the third rule, Sully. Never look directly into the eastern sea at sunset. You can't trust anything you see out there," he replied. What the hell was he talking about? How could we just ignore a massive wave coming right at us? I tried to shove him towards the railing so he could see for himself. But he was stronger than he looked. He didn't even budge. Instead, he steered me around until I was facing away from the swell. "Son, look, the ocean screws with a man's head," he began. "You're going to see a lot of things out here you won't understand. That's why we got these rules. You'll learn each of them when the time comes. So if you see anything off, you come to me first. You got that?" But I couldn't let it go. "Look, I know what I saw. We're going to risk everyone's lives over a bunch of superstitions." Gene remained calm, but there was an edge to his voice now. "If that wave was real, don't you think we'd all be drinking seawater by now?" I froze. He was right. Gene let me back down to my room. He told me I had an early start tomorrow and to get some rest. I just nodded and began kicking off my shoes. But just before he left, he made me say the third rule. Rule number 3, never look at the Eastern Ocean after sunset, and my alarm rang, marking the start of my first official day on the Kraken. Rolling out of bed, I noticed Clive was knocked out on his booth, exhausted from his own shift. After getting ready, I headed to the mess hall where I grabbed a quick breakfast. The day ahead was going to be a full one. Gene handed me my schedule after I ate. As a rig crew, we were on for 12-hour shifts. But thankfully, they fed us 4 times a day, and we got plenty of breaks. Being the new guy, my job for the day was to shadow Gene. This meant I'd get a first-hand look at what it took to keep the Kraken running. Our work as welders was crucial out here. Sea air corroded metal very fast. My first task was to help Gene replace a section of railing that had rusted through. And as I cut it away, I could see how much the salt had eaten into it. We measured and cut a new piece. Then I followed Gene's lead, fixing the new metal into place with clean welds. As the day went on, we moved from one job to another. I got a real education in just how much work it took to keep everything together. We spent most of our time fixing leaky pipes and replacing rusty bolts. By the afternoon, I was getting the hang of things. That was when Gene said we needed to go to the drilling floor for urgent maintenance. As we made our way there, he dropped another one of his rules. Rule number 4, don't speak unless spoken to when near the drill, he said. Gene led me down to the drilling floor, a whole different world from the rest of the rig. It was hot and cramped down here. The entire crew was covered in grease. As I followed Gene, I noticed everyone was using hand signals to communicate. It made total sense considering how loud the machines were. But they kept silent even when they were standing next to each other, only using hand signs. I guess down here they took that rule seriously. We kept moving deeper into the rig, and the deeper we went, the smell of petroleum and seawater got stronger. There was a constant rushing sound around me, like being next to a fast-flowing river. The walls vibrated with the force of the machinery and the ocean around us. Finally, we arrived at a section where pipes on the wall were shaking. They looked like they could fall off at any moment. Gene pointed them out and gestured to his kit. I got the picture. We got straight to work. I grabbed the welding gear while Gene held the new mounts in place. Working here wasn't just about sticking pieces together. It was about making sure everything stayed where it should. The job took all my concentration as I tried to make the welds as strong as possible. In this part of the rig, a bad weld didn't just mean a repair job. It could mean disaster. As we worked, I heard a sudden groaning noise. The whole space tilted to one side. I lost my footing and my head banged against the pipe. Damn it! What the hell was that? I cursed. Gene quickly gestured at me to keep quiet, his eyes wide and serious. But before I could respond, the deep moaning sound echoed around us again. It was louder this time. It vibrated through my chest. It came in waves that got louder and then softer, almost like a whale song. But it felt like it came from something much bigger. I was suddenly aware of how small I was and how easy it would be to get crushed by the steel above me. Or how easy it would be for the ocean to just knock us down. We shouldn't be here, I thought. Some deep part of my mind was screaming at me to get out of here because something big was coming. It felt like my head was splitting open. Gene ripped off his helmet and put a hand over my mouth. I noticed blood trickling from his nose. The terrible noise continued as he kept his hand firmly over my mouth. I did my best to stay calm. I don't know how long we stayed like that, but eventually the noise faded away. The rig steadied, and I could hear the familiar sounds of machinery again. Gene removed his hand before wiping his nose with his sleeve. He put a finger to his lips to remind me to stay quiet. Then, when he was sure that I was okay, he went back to welding like nothing happened. I followed his lead. I could still feel my head throb. I was sure this was going to give me a migraine. After we finished the job, we packed up our gear and walked out of the lower decks. I felt the crew's eyes on me when we passed by. Once we reached the surface, I couldn't hold my questions any longer. Okay, Gene, what the hell just happened down there? I asked. That's why there's a rule about talking near the drill, he began. The closer you are to the drill, the more it can hear you. Okay, what is it? I asked. Gene shrugged. He looked tired. Look, that's what I was told when I started here. I don't have all the answers, Sully. This rig, it's different. You got to respect the rules if you want to stay safe. Okay, and are there other rules I should know about? I said. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. There are 3 more rules you need to remember. Rule number 5, no red meat on Wednesdays. Rule number 6, do not ignore the bell when it rings 3 times. Then Gene looked around to see if anyone was near. He looked scared. This last one, it's the most important rule of all. But you're not supposed to know about it this early. But trust me, it's for everyone's sake. I'll tell you when it's time, he said. All right, come on, Gene, cut the bullshit, okay? If it's so important, why keep it a damn secret? How am I going to keep people safe if I don't even know how to do that? I said. Gene looked exhausted, like all the years on the rig were finally getting to him. Look, son, please just trust me on this, all right? I've kept you alive this long. Just remember those 6 rules, and I'll tell you the last one when you need to hear it, okay? The rest of the shift passed by without anything else happening. Gene was all about business after our talk. His calm attitude helped me get back into the routine of the work. I started to relax, forgetting about what happened in the lower decks. As the days passed, life on the rig fell into a predictable pattern. Wednesday came around, and like he said, we didn't get any red meat that day. I heard a few grumbles from the crew about not getting bacon for breakfast, but it seemed like everyone knew this was coming. I didn't mind. The chicken fajitas I ate were the best I'd ever had. But I did see something that day. I was getting a second helping of beans when I saw the cooks filling up an oil drum with meat, chopped sausages, even a whole leg of lamb. They threw them in straight from the freezer. The steward checked off a list every time they put something in. But that drum wasn't just full of meat. Every time they threw something in, I could see crude oil splash against the rim. When it was full, they wheeled the drum out of the kitchen. I had no idea where they were headed. Gene saw me looking at the whole process. All he could do was shrug and say, "That's Wednesdays for you." Other than that, the week went by peacefully. We went around a rig, replacing anything too rusty to be useful, or doing minor maintenance when we weren't busy. Sometimes I'd get time in the afternoon to play a game of pool. But at night, I'd see things from the corner of my eye when I was on the upper deck. If it was from the east, I ignored it. Sometimes there'd be lights on the water, bright yellows and greens. Other times there'd be a thick fog. One time, I swore something huge flew past the rig. It was a massive shape passing behind us. But overall, I was getting used to being on the Kraken. I did finally meet Clive at some point. He was a funny guy when he wasn't snoring into a pillow. He told me his contract had been renewed 6 times so far. He had 2 kids he was putting through college back in Louisiana. And that was something I noticed a lot too. The crew would often talk about how many contract renewals they'd signed up for. But it was like there was an unspoken hierarchy about that. The more time someone had signed up again, the more respect people seemed to give them. It didn't matter what rank they were. I'd seen guys get into arguments against their supervisors. And you know what the crazy thing was? I'd seen drilling heads back down when renewals got brought up. Other than that, the crew got along really well. Before I knew it, I was a couple days away from going on leave. But something happened that made me question whether I'd even want to go back to the Kraken. It was a Tuesday. Me and Gene were back below deck. We were fixing up railings on the walkways. I gotten used to the occasional groan or tilting under there. Just as we were about to finish up, a bell rang over the PA system. 3 loud clangs, one after the other. Gene paused and looked at me. You remember what that means, right? I knew we weren't supposed to ignore the bell, but I was fuzzy on the details. Yeah, we shouldn't ignore the bell. But what exactly are we supposed to do? I replied, "Leave your gear. Follow me to the safe rooms," he said as he took off his helmet. Safe rooms? I couldn't remember anything about safe rooms during training. Still, I followed Gene's lead. We made our way back to the upper decks. Other crew joined us, all headed the same way. The safe rooms turned out to be 3 large rooms on the rig. Each one was equipped with a small medic station and bathrooms. Gene led me into one of them. Looking around, I noticed some guys who looked like they'd just woken up. Clive was one of them. His hair was a mess, and he was standing around in his boxers. And yet, he was still wearing his silver pin. Once everyone was inside, the bell rang out 3 more times. Then, a couple of operators slid the door shut. My eyes were drawn to the inside of the door as it closed. It was covered in writing, though it wasn't any language I recognized. They looked Egyptian to me, because of these little drawings. There was a drawing of a fish with big eyes, a circle with tentacles coming out of it, a snake with 2 heads, a bunch of other characters made up of dots and sharp lines. Gene wandered over to one of the chairs lining the back wall and sat down. Everyone around me started making themselves comfortable. Seemed like we'd be here a while. I saw Clive sit in a corner and nod off, and then there was a knock on the door. Everyone froze, like they were very scared of what happened next. I looked over at Clive. He was wide awake now, his face going pale. The knocking continued. Then a voice started shouting to let him in. The operators were huddled by the door. It was clear they were arguing with each other, but I couldn't really hear what they were saying. All around me, people were getting into their own debates. Tensions were rising. I looked back at Gene, but his eyes were fixed firmly at the door, his fingers rubbing at the pin on his shirt. The man outside continued to yell. He begged us to let him in. He said it wasn't fair that he got locked out. He was asleep when the bells rang, and his dorm was the farthest away from the safe rooms. The operators seemed to have come to a decision. Two of them opened the doors just a crack, but it wasn't big enough to let the guy through. A couple of the guys behind me started shouting. They said not to risk everyone's lives. Some of them yelled about how the rules needed to be followed. The senior operator walked up to the opening and whispered something. Hobbs, I think his name was. Shouting broke out. The man outside started shoving his fingers through the door. He was trying to force himself through. I could hear Hobbs now. You get back or we'll crush those fingers, Barker. You know the rules, we can't let you in. Barker, the man behind the door, started pleading, saying he renewed 10 times that he was almost done paying for his wife's medical bills. Then you shouldn't have left your damn pin. Barricade your dorm. Maybe you'll survive, all right? Hobbs said back. And then I saw something that still haunts me to this day. The senior operator grabbed his radio, and he slammed it on Barker's fingers. I heard something snap. Barker howled like a dog as he pulled away. And just like that, they shut the doors on him. Silence fell over the crowd, and then the rig pitched to one side. I could feel the floor vibrate before I heard a loud noise from below. Everyone get down. You know what to do, Hobbs said. People fell on their knees, try not to fall on one another as they sat down. I followed their lead and I waited for it to be over. But behind the door, Barker started screaming. The rig was tilting side to side now. It was like we were in a hurricane. All around me, people were rubbing their silver pins. Their eyes were wide with fear. Then another groan came from below, but this one sounded more like a howl. It completely covered up Barker's yelling. The vibrations bounced around my chest and worked their way up to my fillings. Someone gagged behind me. I could feel the nausea building up too. This was just like that first day, when Gene warned me about talking in the lower decks. I looked up, and the writings on the door looked like they were moving. The fish with 2 eyes blinked at me. The 2-headed snake wrapped around a drawing of a human. The thing with the tentacles spun around like a whirlwind. Human figures danced in a chain, and then suddenly it all stopped. The Kraken stopped rocking. The painful groaning disappeared. The writing on the door was the same as before. For a few moments, no one said anything. Then the bells rang out on the PA system again. The guys at the front started opening the doors, but no one else moved. Hobbs walked out and immediately ran back in. You all stay in your dorms until further notice, he told us. I wasn't going to argue, but as I got to the doors, I could see why he said that. There wasn't much of Barker left outside the safe room. I saw his shoe caught in some pipes on the ceiling. I tried to avoid stepping on anything red, but there were chunks scattered all over the hallway. And mixed in with the gore was shimmering black oil. I went on my assigned leave a few days after that. I didn't really have anywhere to go. I just bummed around Cancun till it was time for me to go back. Now I did think about quitting, but I really should have read the fine print on that contract before I signed. Turns out I was under bond, which meant that if I quit early, I'd have to pay up to 3 months' worth of my salary, plus a bunch of other penalties. I didn't have that kind of money, and I was still paying for the loans I had to take out to get certified for this job. People like to say that we always have a choice. What no one ever tells you, though, is that a lot of times you get screwed no matter what you pick. Soon enough, I was back on the copter on my way to the Kraken. The atmosphere was a lot more tense than when I started a few months ago. People really didn't joke around as much anymore. or even talk to one another during breaks. And I'm not the type to rat somebody out, but a lot of empty tequila bottles started popping up in the rec areas. At the end of my first week back, Gene brought out his own and poured me a shot. You still remember all those rules, Sully? The ones not in the manuals. He slurred out. I turned down the drink, but I nodded. I could never forget them. Well, here's the thing. Now's the time to tell you about that last one. The most important one. Gene leaned over, and he lowered his voice. So, rule number 7. Everyone joins the raffle. He whispered. I had wondered for weeks what the big secret rule was. That was the last thing I expected. A raffle? Okay, what does that mean? I asked, but Gene looked like he was about to pass out. Oh, it's a big thing. Lots of money going around. But remember, my boy, you gotta be there, he said. As he pushed himself off me, he wandered off the bed. He wouldn't tell me anything else about the raffle after that. All he said was that it's something the company does at the end of everyone's 3-month contract. I pretty much kept my head down for the next couple weeks. I did my job, had my pin on me all the time, and I stayed out of people's way. Things were getting a lot more hostile among the crew, and I heard a lot more arguments break out. I never actually saw a fight, but I've seen some people walking around with cuts and bruises. And then finally, it was time for the raffle. It was everyone's last day on the job, unless someone agreed to renew, of course. I looked over my shift schedule that day, and I saw the entire evening was blocked out for the raffle. Everyone was supposed to gather at the main deck after the last dinner shift. The cooks went all out that night, steak and lobster for everyone. But no one seemed hungry. I finished up my food, and I hung around the rec center until it was time to go up. At around 9 p.m., the PA system told everyone to go to the main deck. When I got there, the crowd was forming a rough circle around Hobbs and the other senior managers. They were setting up a bingo cage and some speakers. Behind them was a large oil drum. I found Gene in the crowd, and I got up next to him. Everyone looked nervous and twitchy. Then Hobbs picked up a mic and addressed the crowd. Evening, everyone. Good job on getting to the end of your contract. Now, before we do the raffle, I want to clarify something. What happened to Ron Barker was tragic, but it did not count. We made a deal to keep the oil flowing, to keep the Kraken floating, to keep the money coming. We follow the rules, and we do the raffle every 3 months. Now, Mr. Barker, he broke the rules, and we still have to do this. Hobbs cleared his throat and continued. The good news, though, is that the company will be doing a 10% increase on this round's bonuses, just this once. Everyone who doesn't win the raffle will get the usual bonus plus the increase on top. Sounds good. That did sound good to me. I'd forgotten about that end of contract bonus. I remember reading something about that in the paperwork, but no one else seemed as excited about it as I was. The only reaction Hobbs got was a couple of weak cheers. He didn't really care, though. He signaled to the guy mixing up the bingo cage. He gave it a few more turns, then took out a wooden ball. Without looking at it, he handed the ball to Hobbs. The winner of this round's raffle is Mr. Clive Harper, Hobbs said. A loud cry erupted to my right. There was a scuffle and some shouting, until finally Clive was brought to the middle. 2 big men held him down. Gene's hand clamped on my arm. He leaned down and whispered in my ear. It'll be over soon, all right? Just think of that bonus. Think of all the good it'll do for your family. That's why most of us are here now, he said, and it sounded like he was pleading with me. One of the managers opened up the oil drum behind Hobbs. She dipped a large cup in it and walked over to where Clive was kneeling. He was crying and begging now. A man grabbed him by the hair and forced his head back, and then she poured thick black oil down Clive's throat. She didn't stop until the cup was empty. I could hear Clive gagging until he threw up the oil, and as soon as he did, the other managers ran up and they dipped paintbrushes into the mess. Then they ran off to the edge of the rig and they started painting. They drew symbols on the floor, going around the perimeter of the Kraken. Symbols like the ones I saw in the safe room. Every now and then, they'd go back and dip their paintbrush in the stuff Clive threw up. The crowd was silent. No one moved, except to let the managers pass through. passed through. The only thing I could hear was Clive gagging. "Gene, what the hell is going on? What is this?" I demanded. Gene looked at me. "Someone has to do it, kid. That's part of the deal the company made with whatever's keeping the well full. But the bosses, they give everyone a bonus for having to go through this. Some of these guys, they've been renewing their contracts for years without getting chosen. It's all down to luck in the end," he explained. "But Clive, the medics are going to save him, right? He got it all out," I said. Gene's eyes glazed over. "Kid, once the managers finish painting all around the rig, move to the back of the crowd. You hear me? You don't have to do this next part, but you need to stay inside the drawings for the whole thing," he said. The crowd tensed up then. It was like they were all getting ready for something. And then I saw the managers stop painting. Gene pushed me to the back as the crowd surged. Everyone ran towards Clive. Their hands reached out for him. I heard Clive scream. 4 hours. I grew up in a very poor area in rural Tennessee. And to say my family had a negative history with the police, that's an understatement. My father spent most of his adult life behind bars, and my cousin was raided twice. When I was a teen, my friends and I made a game of running from the police. We spent most of our time drinking or exploring abandoned buildings, so we had a lot of these run-ins. The bacon and donut jokes were frequent. So one Saturday night when I was 16, my friends and I were on our way home from a party. I was kind of drunk at this point, as was everyone else in my car, including the driver, my best friend Cade. I remember fighting back sleep while glancing out the window, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, there's this huge bang. Before I even knew what was happening, the car flipped. And to this day, I still couldn't tell you how it happened. Cade wasn't wearing a seatbelt and was ejected from the vehicle. I had glass in my face and was bruised up, but I was overall okay. I'm not sure if it was the adrenaline or the alcohol, but I didn't feel any pain. I quickly kicked my door open, and I got out of the car. Cade was on the ground bleeding terribly. I tore off my shirt to use it to try to stop the bleeding, but Cade was unconscious. I tried to get him up and wake him up, but he was unresponsive. My other friend, who was sitting in the back seat, was able to get out of the car. His leg was badly injured, so he couldn't walk, but he was able to hand me his phone, and I dialed 911. The police arrived at the scene before paramedics did. Up to this point in my life, I'd never witnessed an officer helping anyone, only, arresting people and putting them in jail. I expected nothing good. I figured we'd be in handcuffs before he even tried to help. But I was wrong. The officer wasn't someone I recognized, but he quickly jumped in to resuscitate Cade. Luckily, he was able to get him responsive before the paramedics arrived. The officer made sure my friends and I got home safely. I was the last to be taken home, and we actually had a good conversation. He had a lot of really good stories from his job, and he even offered to let me do some ride-alongs. So you can imagine, everyone I knew was very shocked when I decided to attend the police academy a few years later. A few of my friends and family distanced themselves, and I understood. I jumped into my new career headfirst, and I never looked back. I took a job in a small town in the Tennessee Appalachians. At first, I was a little bummed out about not being in a bigger city with more excitement. But I quickly realized that protecting the safety of the people in this small town was a lot trickier than I first thought. Sure, maybe there aren't gangs, cartels, and murder cases very often, but there were a lot of strangely interesting calls over the years. One that really sticks out to me is the night I was dispatched to a back road where a woman, Michelle, reported she hit someone with her car. Luckily, it was a slow night, so I headed right out. This place was so deep in the woods that it took me a good 20 minutes to get there. When I arrived, her car, a small Honda Civic, was parked off to the side of the road. I parked behind her and proceeded to tap on the car window. And she quite literally almost jumped out of her skin when she heard the tap. Clasping her chest, Michelle rolled down her window. I could see her dark eye makeup running down her cheeks. Clearly, she'd been crying. "What happened tonight, ma'am?" I asked. I was just driving home from a friend's house, and all of a sudden this kid ran out in front of me. I swerved, but I hit him. She began to cry then. I could tell she wasn't drunk and clearly felt terrible about what happened. Michelle went on to tell me that the boy she hit looked to be about 9 or 10. There weren't any houses nearby, so she didn't know where he came from. She reported that the boy was injured. One of his legs was bent at a strange angle, so she ran out of the car to help him. His demeanor, though, wasn't what you'd expect from a child who was very injured. While he appeared to be in pain, he didn't cry, scream, or seem scared at all. He appeared to be very calm, but he wasn't able to stand up. Panicked, Michelle got back into her car to grab her phone and dial 911. While she was on the phone with dispatch, she noticed the boy was standing at her window, asking to be let into her car. Her phone died exactly at the moment she saw him standing there. Luckily, she'd already given her location. She began to open the car door, but stopped. She explained to me that suddenly something just didn't feel right. The rational part of her brain kicked in, and she wondered why a child would be running through the woods by himself at 11 at night. Where were his parents? Sure, irresponsible parents exist, but there weren't even any houses out here. So why was he out alone? He was also standing up straight and appeared to be in no pain after just being hit by a car. Despite her uneasiness, Michelle decided she had no choice but to let him in. After all, she hit the poor kid. But then she noticed his eyes. They were pitch black. No visible white, no iris. Although the door was partially opened, she attempted to pull it shut, but the child pulled it back open stronger than she was. "Thanks for letting me in," he whispered. By this point, he was smiling and appeared to be in no pain. The boy began laughing then, but not a light-hearted, childish laugh. A maniacal, creepy laugh. Michelle pushed him away, slammed the door, and drove off. And a few miles down the road, her engine began to overheat, and she had to stop. When she looked out her window, the boy was back. He tapped on her car window over and over again, alternating between begging to be let in and threatening her if she didn't open the door. Michelle continued to keep her car locked and avoided eye contact. She waited till several minutes of silence had passed before looking around, and the boy was gone. She breathed a sigh of relief and began searching in the console for her car charger. Distracted, she heard another tap on the window, and she looked up to see the boy pressed up against her windshield. She said his face and body were bloody and disfigured. "Help me," he said, although it was muffled by the glass. Michelle screamed, and she tried to start her car several times with no luck. When she looked back up, he was gone again. She sat there crying and frozen with fear until I arrived. So I looked around and I couldn't find the boy, although I have to say I didn't try that hard. This wasn't my first run-in with black-eyed children, so I know many are familiar with the urban legend. I'm not sure if Michelle was or wasn't. She was already pretty shook up, and I didn't want to make it any worse, so I just focused on making sure she got home, okay? The stories about black-eyed children, they usually go something like this. Children show up and ask to come inside your house or car, usually saying they're lost and need to call their parents. They look pretty normal, except they're usually wearing vintage clothing. And then you notice their eyes, which are all black. Their demeanor may seem strange as well. Most people who encounter black-eyed children report them as being overly calm with emotionless voices. So anyway, Michelle's car started again, and I followed her home. I took her contact information, and I let her know I'd be in touch if we needed more information about the accident. But I knew we wouldn't. And then, sadly, Michelle passed away 2 months later, while in another state visiting family. She drove over a bridge that collapsed. It was a small bridge that was overdue for repairs, and her car was the only one on it. Now, some people say this is just a coincidence, but I don't think so. Sometimes run-ins with the supernatural have lingering effects. I wondered if maybe Michelle saw something on that bridge before she died. Maybe she saw a little boy with a broken leg. So another call I'll never forget. It started off a lot weirder. We got this call from a man in his 60s named Casey, who had a pretty strong history of paranoia and drug use. Usually, he wasn't the one calling for himself. In the past, it was neighbors or family calling, either angry or concerned about his behavior, depending on the situation. Casey told a dispatcher that he heard some commotion outside and opened his door to see a pizza delivery driver setting a pizza down on the ground, right in front of his porch. Casey hadn't ordered pizza that night, but the driver insisted someone placed an order to this address. The caller's phone number even matched Casey's landline number. The order instructed the driver to set the pizza in front of the porch. There was even a $20 bill sitting at the foot of the porch steps for the pizza. Casey and the driver had an argument, and Casey sent him away, then picked up the 20. Casey called in to report this as a prank, since neighborhood kids had messed with him in the past. So because there was no immediate safety concern, I took my time getting there. Casey usually wasn't the friendliest to law enforcement, but I'd never had a problem dealing with him. He explained the situation, and I figured it was either a prank or something he just made up. That said, I decided to check under the porch for good measure. Casey's house was old and not in the best shape. There was a gap under his porch that used to be covered by wood fencing, but the wood had rotted over time, leaving a hole. So I turned on my flashlight, and I looked through it. I noticed a few empty beer cans and some scraps of what looked like raw meat. So I asked Casey if he ever hung out under the porch, and he looked at me like I was crazy and said no. I didn't think so, but he was a pretty eccentric guy, so I figured I'd better ask. I decided to search the area under the porch and take a closer look. And as I crawled around, I almost fell into this huge hole in the ground. I shined my flashlight down to show him that it looked like someone had been living there. And then Casey began cursing up a storm. That's my beer, and I bet that my $20 bill too. I'll be damned if some idiot thinks they can stay on my property. I'm going down there. And then with an agility I didn't know he had, Casey ducked under the porch, and he went through the hole. Damn it, I exclaimed. I had to follow him to make sure he didn't get hurt. I yelled out to let him know that if he didn't stop, I'd have to call for backup. I really wanted to avoid this, since a lot of times this led to a pink slip, which had never seemed to help Casey in the past. I think I tended to be more patient and sympathetic with him, given some of my family history. So I carefully climbed down the cave entrance, and it led to a large area with one other opening. I called after Casey, but he didn't respond. I walked over to the opening, hunched down, and I shined my flashlight through. I moved inside, having to bend down to fit, and the cave broke off into two paths on either side. I was looking down the left side when I heard movement from my right, and I turned around to see what looked like an older man. And when I say older, I mean like 90. He was deathly pale, almost transparent, aside from his many visible veins and his eyes that were this cloudy white. When he saw the light, he hissed at me, and it was chilling, and he ran back into the tunnel. So at this point, I was barely able to keep the flashlight stable. I knew I'd messed up. Going deep into an uncharted underground cave system with no backup certainly wasn't following protocol. I was getting ready to retrace my steps when I heard a man scream. It sounded just like Casey, so I went towards the sound. I reached a large circular section of the cave, and I saw several more of the pale people with white eyes. I turned my flashlight power down, and it pointed to the ground. They appeared to be a family of different ages and gender. The youngest looked around 12, but they all had white hair. They made these strange clicking noises and periodically tapped the sides of the caves. And then I saw Casey tied up in the corner with a strange family surrounding him. He was doing his best to fight them off, screaming and crying as they crept closer to him. Luckily, they hadn't noticed me coming in. I fired a warning shot into the ground, but it must have hit a rock and ricocheted, and it hit the adult male of the family. They all started wailing, and they ran to his aid. And while they were distracted, I cut Casey's ropes, and I told him to follow me, and let's get the hell out of here. And these pale humanoids ran after us. Luckily, shining my flashlight at them on a high setting seemed to really slow them down. And then I heard Casey yell from behind me. He'd fallen into a deep hole. He couldn't climb back out. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to get him back up either if I climbed down to help him. Abandoning my better judgment, I climbed down to help Casey anyway, and we began looking for another way out. I found this opening that led to another section of caves. The ground was rough and crackled with each step, and I looked down to see that we were walking on bones. Some clearly looked like animal bones, but others clearly weren't. And then it was pitch black. My flashlight stopped working. Casey started to scream, but I placed my hand over his mouth. I grabbed a matchbook from my pocket and we continued to go through the cave system. And I worried we were going further down instead of back up. The tunnels were becoming more and more narrow. But when we found another entryway, it opened up to a large cave. As I stepped forward, my foot sank into a few inches of water. Casey began digging in his pockets and retrieved a small keychain flashlight. Apparently, he forgot he had it on him. It didn't produce much light, but it was way better than the matches. We saw that we were at the edge of an underground pond, and I noticed that on the other side, there was a path that appeared to ascend upward. I almost thought I could see moonlight shining through, but maybe I was just being optimistic. "Can you swim?" I asked Casey, and he nodded. So we took off our shoes and excess clothing, and we waded into the water. When Casey shined his light into it, I noticed fish. They too were transparent, and they had no eyes. We were about halfway across the pond when I heard a splash behind us. The old man had jumped in and was quickly swimming towards us. Casey and I frantically swam to the other side. I got out and Casey started yelling. The man had him by the legs and was pulling him back into the water. I grabbed onto Casey and I punched the man. Despite his appearance, the old man put up a hell of a fight, but he finally let go. Casey hurried out of the water. "All right, let's go," I said, and we hurried up the tunnel. Luckily for us, we finally reached an opening. It was in a wooded area a few miles from Casey's home, so we booked it back to my car. I paid for a hotel for Casey that night on my own dime. He said something about talking to his case manager about moving to an apartment. There was this one time I responded to a call from a farmer who had put up a trail cam in an effort to see what was killing his chickens, yet dodging the live traps. He only had it up a few days before it picked up something strange. While the footage was grainy, I could see an unnaturally tall, maybe 7-foot creature walking on 2 legs. It had antlers, but it definitely was not a deer. It was thin, and its fur appeared matted and mangled. It had some visible open wounds on its body. Even with a low-quality video, I could tell this wasn't an animal I'd ever seen before. I searched the surrounding area, but I couldn't find anything. I had to just tell the farmer to give me a call if he spotted anything strange. Now, I wish this story had a happier ending, but a few weeks later, I was called to a crime scene. Several cattle on the same farm were violently slaughtered, pretty much ripped to shreds. The farmer must have come out to check on them, and unfortunately, he suffered the same fate. The trail cams were still up, so we checked the footage, and the recording stopped at midnight, then randomly started again at 4 a.m. Needless to say, the incident must have happened between midnight and 4 a.m. So we had nothing to go on, and we never did solve this case. One encounter I had while off duty was very creepy. I just finished my shift, and I stepped into a 24-7 diner on the edge of town. It was around 5 a.m., so it was only me and the owner. He served me up my usual coffee, eggs, and bacon, and we chatted for a few minutes before he went back to the kitchen. Before my food came up, a man walked in. He was very tall and thin, and looked like maybe he was in his 30s. His cheekbones were sunken, in a way I'd never seen before, even with people with severe substance issues, and his skin had a grayish overtone. He sat down by himself in a back booth. He wore jeans and a black hoodie, keeping his hood up. The owner returned to the dining room and went over to take his order. The man didn't speak, only pointed to what he wanted. Despite the man's strange appearance and behavior, I enjoyed my meal and largely ignored him. After all, it wasn't a crime to be struggling, and he wasn't bothering anyone. After he finished his food, the owner brought the man's receipt over. The man waited for the owner to walk away, then calmly walked out the door. The owner yelled for him to stop, and as exhausted as I was, I told the owner I would handle it. I'd known him for a long time, after all. I chased this frail-looking man into the street, and the owner trailed behind me. I finally caught up to the thief at the edge of a tree line. I grabbed him and attempted to put him in handcuffs, but he put up quite a fight. I managed to put one of the hands in cuffs when I locked eyes with him, and his eyes were not normal. The pupils were strange. The best way I can describe them is that they looked like minus signs, similar to a goat's eyes. He smiled, the corners of his mouth freakishly far apart, and his teeth didn't look human. They were jagged little triangles. I let go of my handcuffs, put my hand on my gun, and I pushed him into the woods. He fell over and rolled, then stood part of the way up, hunching over. His body rapidly transformed. His skin began sprouting hair, and his back bent down until he was walking on all fours. He gradually took the form of the coyote as he descended into the woods. Needless to say, the owner never got his money for that meal. Now, the final call that is forever branded into my memory was from a mother of a young child. She called into the station one evening, frantic because her 4-year-old daughter was missing. I and a few additional officers went out to their home, which was in a very rural and isolated area. We talked with the mother to get a description of her daughter Emma, and she said she had blue eyes, brown hair, and was wearing a white shirt with jeans. She'd been playing outside on the swing set. Her mom went inside to make a sandwich, and she must have wandered off. But from what her mom said, Emma wasn't one to run off on her own. Emma's mom spent 20 minutes checking the woods and calling out to her daughter, but she couldn't find her. And she clearly felt very guilty and repeatedly called herself irresponsible. I tried to help her and reassure her. My kids had wandered off a few times when they were young, and I knew how scary it could be. Hey, it could have happened to anyone, I told her. We'll find her, I said, reassuring her. So the other officers and I agreed to start in different directions. Despite it being barely dusk, the thick tree line made the wooded area almost dark. I walked for around half an hour before I noticed a strange structure. It was circular and made up of branches, mud, and other random things from the forest. It almost looked like a giant bird's nest, except it was on the ground. Now, this thing was huge, at least 15 feet side to side. So I approached it and looked inside, and I saw a small child in the middle of it sound asleep. And I knew it was Emma right away from the pictures. Her hair was tangled, and her white shirt was covered in dirt. I tapped on Emma's shoulder gently to wake her up, and she opened her eyes. She looked scared. Hey, it's okay, I told her. And I said I was going to take her back to her mom. Emma looked confused. She told me her mom was already in the woods. She said she was playing on the swing set when she heard her mom call to her from the woods. Emma was told to follow her, as there was a surprise waiting for her. Emma followed, and then she became lost. Occasionally, she would hear her mom's voice and try to follow it. Eventually, she made it to the weird nest, became very tired, and just fell asleep. I didn't see anyone else out here. I picked Emma up and I began walking her back. As we walked, I noticed the woods were completely quiet. No wind, birds, or animals. Look, Emma said, pointing to something. It was a doll. I sat Emma down and I picked it up. It was made mostly of sticks and leaves, except for the hair. It looked like it was real hair, as creepy as that sounds. It also had a strip of white fabric as a dress. I brought the doll with me. As we continued to walk, I noticed something disturbing. Emma's hair had been cut short on one side, and a piece of her shirt was missing. I shuddered. I brought Emma back to her mom, and she was so happy to see her that she cried. I never showed her the doll. I took the doll to a sort of expert I knew, who specialized in getting rid of these types of things. Now, while some of the things I've come across have made my blood run cold, I'll never quit. I love this town and the people in it. And if you're ever driving out this way, and you see something strange, be careful on the back roads. Everybody thinks, wouldn't it be great to come out to the forest, live in a fire tower? But imagine being out here alone for weeks at a time. There is some weird, creepy shit out in these woods. I know because I've seen it myself. A lot of hikers and campers go missing around here. Some of them come back with stories you would not believe. Some of them never come back. I'm one of those people. I went missing for 4 days, and I'm lucky to even still be alive. And if you're ever out in the woods and you hear sirens, are you in? So if you've ever thought about living in a fire tower, it's not like a long vacation in the national parks. In reality, you end up carrying water, food, books, and other supplies up 11 flights of stairs, all to live in a 10 by 10 room and sleep on a bunk bed that's been used by like 100 other people. Yes, the view from the walk around the deck It is spectacular. And if you're good with being on your own, it might be a good fit for you. But today was a very bad day. So I'm standing here in a tiny room 120 feet up in the air, watching rain coming down in buckets. Thunder is booming and the wind must be upwards of 60 miles per hour. So the whole tower is swaying back and forth. And my dog, who's terrified of loud noises, is hiding under the bed. To top it all off, I left my boots on the porch and they're now filled with at least 6 inches of water. On the positive side, after a heavy rain like this, I won't have to worry about fires. On the other hand, there's going to be a lot of debris to clean up. The rain continued for the rest of the day and on through the night. And when I woke up the next morning, sunlight was peeking through the clouds. I had to coax my dog Molly out from under the bed with scrambled eggs and bacon bits mixed in with her dog food. Molly, she's a 3-year-old border collie I got from a dog shelter when she was just 6 months old. Border collies are working dogs, so they don't like being left alone for long periods of time. They like to be close to their person. And she's an escape artist. She can open a closed door and climb over a 6-foot fence. Luckily, I work for the Forest Service. It's a take-your-dog-to-work kind of job, and she has proven herself to be a very valuable part of the team. Once, when I was clearing a trail, 2 panicked parents came up to me. They said they were hiking with their 9-year-old son, Daniel. But when they turned around, he was gone. They called and searched for over an hour before looking for help. I had them take me back to where they'd last seen him. And Molly saved the day. Dogs can hear much better than we can. So I blew the emergency whistle I had in my gear, and I had us all stay completely silent. Molly must have heard him calling for help because she just took off into the woods. After a 40-minute trek through the undergrowth, we found him, exhausted and pretty scratched up. But okay. I walked with a family back to their car, and while we were walking, I asked Daniel what happened. He said he was following his parents on a trail and looking for some cool rocks for his collection. Suddenly, he saw something move beyond the trees, so he stopped to get a better look. About 10 feet off the trail, he saw a giant white owl just sitting there, staring right at him. Daniel took a few steps off the trail to get closer. The huge bird fluttered its wings and hopped a little farther into the woods. Daniel had almost caught up to it when he just disappeared, and in the owl's place was a small black stone. Daniel said that the stone had very strange markings on it. He picked it up, put it in his pocket, and turned around to head back towards his parents. But instead of seeing the trail, he saw a high rock wall going at least 50 feet straight up. He said no matter which way he went, he couldn't find his way back to the trail. When Daniel started getting tired, he remembered to stay in one place to make it easier for people to find him. So he sat down under a large tree and called for help. But no one came. And here's the really strange part. The boy had been lost for maybe 2.5 hours at the most. But Daniel said he was gone for 3 days. He said he saw the sun go down 3 times and he never heard anyone calling for him. But every few hours, he would hear something big walking through the woods. Daniel couldn't see what it was, said he was too scared to look. He just hid behind a tree and tried to stay quiet. The only thing he saw was Molly running towards him right before he got rescued. I asked Daniel if I could see the stone he found, but after searching through his pockets, he couldn't find it. He said he must have lost it over there. The way Daniel said over there made it sound like it was another planet. Well, we got back to the car. They thanked Molly and me again and headed home. But the parents must have called the local newspaper because the following week, a reporter came out to take some photos of Molly. They put her picture under the headline, "Hero Dog Finds Missing Boy." And she's been a bit of a local celebrity after that. Sometimes a hiker will even recognize her. And whenever we're in town, she always gets a free scoop of ice cream. Molly seems to love the forest ranger lifestyle, but she's afraid of loud noises like thunder. So I couldn't really blame her for hiding under the bed during last night's storm. I spent the morning after the storm picking up branches from around the base of the tower. Once that was clear, Molly and I checked the trails. There's really only one main trail this far out into the forest. It enters the clearing by the fire tower from the south, then keeps going farther north. There's a few small offshoots and overlooks into the valley, but they're all dead ends. I found a few small trees blocking the path, and those were easy enough to clear by hand. As I tossed those into the woods, Molly helped by dragging away some of the smaller branches. A few miles from the fire tower, a huge pine tree had come down right across the trail. That was a bigger job involving a chainsaw. So Molly and I took a break for early lunch. I was sitting on a log finishing up a bag of chips when I noticed that Molly was acting strange. Ordinarily, when I'm eating something shareable, Molly will stare at me with the intensity of 1,000 white-hot suns. But she was looking off-trail towards the valley. Her head was tilted to the side, and she was whining softly. "What is it, girl?" I stopped chewing to listen, but I didn't hear anything. Molly and I are always out in the woods. She completely ignores rabbits and squirrels, and she barely gives a deer a second look. So I thought maybe it was a mountain lion passing by. Molly took a few more steps into the woods, and when I walked up next to her, I could see that she was trembling. Following her gaze, I noticed an overgrown path, an offshoot from the main trail I'd never seen before. Maybe that fallen pine had blocked it from view. Curious now, I carefully headed down what remained of the old trail. I knew it couldn't go very far, because unless I'd gotten completely turned around, the path should end at a steep cliff overlooking the valley. Minutes later, I came to the end of the trail, and blocking the way were two huge boulders with a 10-foot opening between them. The opening was blocked by a massive deadfall of tangled branches and small trees. There was no way around. On the other side of the boulders, there was a steep drop-off into the valley. "What the hell is this?" I mumbled. The whole thing looked strange. It looked old, steep, and dangerous. For some reason, it reminded me of a Stephen King book, Pet Sematary, when the old guy and the new neighbor climb over a huge deadfall at night to bury a dead cat. After standing there for a few minutes, I decided to head back to the main trail to get back to work and start cutting up that fallen pine tree. I'd made up my mind to ask Chester if he knew anything about the old hidden path and the massive blockade of piled-up branches. Chester had been a park ranger in this area for at least 25 years. He knew this park inside and out. If anyone would know about it, he would. I started walking back when I realized Molly wasn't with me, and I turned to see her about 80 feet back, standing perfectly still, staring at the deadfall. Her head was tilted like she was listening to something in the distance. And then all of a sudden, she took a running leap up onto the deadfall and just started climbing. "No, no, Molly, come," I said, running towards her. But she didn't stop. By the time I got back to the deadfall, her tail was just disappearing over the top. I ran around the side of one of the boulders, still calling for her, but I couldn't see anything, only a sheer drop. And I heard Molly bark from the other side. But when she barked again a few minutes later, she sounded much farther away. I ran back to the main trail to grab my supplies. I quickly hid the chainsaw and tools off trail in case any hikers with children came through. I rushed back to the deadfall, and I started climbing. It was only about 15 feet high, but it was dangerous. A couple of times, branches broke under my weight, and I almost fell through. This is a great way to break a leg, I thought to myself. Reaching the top, I looked down to find a small path at the bottom of the deadfall. It looked like it was carved right out of the side of the mountain. On the left side of the little 2-foot path was the rocky face of the mountain. On the right side was this huge drop-off. I swung my leg over, and I started climbing down the other side of the deadfall. If I fell now, and I missed the path, I'd enjoy a 200-foot drop straight down to the valley floor. No wonder they'd blocked this trail, I thought. Breathing a sigh of relief, my boots finally hit solid ground. I used the high vantage point to check for any signs of Molly, but all I could see was the steep trail I was standing on, slowly descending down the mountain and into the tree line. There were no clearings that I could see in the valley, just dense forest. So I started down. I had to watch my step because every once in a while a chunk of the trail had fallen away, and there would be a 2-foot section of open air. But about halfway down, I began to notice a slight haze along the base of the trees. The closer I got to the valley floor, the more the light mist turned into a heavy fog. It was cool and damp at the bottom of the trail. The temperature must have dropped 10 or 15 degrees. I called out for Molly, but the sound of my voice seemed to fade into the mist, so I blew my emergency whistle. Molly would hear that from a long way off. I listened for any sign of her, but nothing. Looking down, I noticed paw prints in the damp ground heading into the forest. Followed. 30 minutes later, I lost Molly's trail. I decided to walk in a large circle and try to look for more paw prints. I marked my starting point with a piece of rope tied to a massive oak tree. After 45 minutes of walking through dense forest, I realized I was lost. It was hard to see 10 feet in front of me through the heavy fog, and I started to get the feeling that something was watching me. Shaking off the paranoia, I blew my whistle again to see if Molly could find me. The sound might also scare off mountain lions. And then I sat down on a log for a drink. I was putting the canteen away when a man stepped out from the trees. He was young, maybe in his 20s, thin, in tattered clothes with an old backpack slung over his shoulders. Startled, I said, "Hey, looking for my dog. You okay?" And without saying a word, he put his hand up to cover his mouth, signaling for me to keep quiet. He pointed into the trees, and I felt the vibration through the soles of my boots. It was a ways off, but every 4 or 5 seconds, I could feel the ground shake slightly. And then I heard it. A soft boom. The sound would repeat, and it was like something huge was walking through the valley. And it was getting closer. I looked over to the guy, and I saw that he's plastered himself behind a large tree. And that's when I hear the siren. It was so loud I actually fell to the ground. And the sound was coming from above the tree line. This thing, whatever it was close now. And I stayed low. The ground shook with each step. There was a fallen log on the ground next to me, and I saw it roll away to the left. It was the next blast of the siren that got me moving. It was so loud that I could feel my eardrums ringing. It sounded like it was almost on top of me. I scrambled toward the nearest tree, and I held on to it, my face pressed into the bark. And then there was silence. Everything went completely still. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. And then it was moving again, moving away from us. And I thought about Molly, how she was so afraid of loud noises. I hoped she was as far away as possible. And I hoped she was okay. I looked over to where the guy had been hiding. But he was gone. Legs shaking now, I slid down to the ground and I tried to catch my breath. And it was then that Molly's head poked through the underbrush. "Molly? Man, am I glad to see you," I said, patting my leg for her to come. But she didn't move. "It's okay, girl. Come on, let's get out of here," I said. But Molly stayed where she was, just whining softly. She looked back into the brush, and then she took a small step towards me. And something came with her out of the bushes. It was a little girl with long dark hair, maybe 8 or 9 years old. She was wearing a Rugrats t-shirt, and she was clutching Molly's fur like it was a lifeline in the ocean. Now I could see that the girl was scared, so I spoke as quietly as I could. "Hey there. So you met Molly, huh? She's a good dog." The girl looked down at Molly and then backed up at me. What do you say the 3 of us find our way out of here, huh?" She stood there motionless for a full minute, and then she gave a slight nod. "Okay, good. All right, will you hold on to Molly so she doesn't get lost, okay? Can you take my hand?" I stood where I was, and I held my hand out towards her. After a moment, she slowly came forward and took it. Grabbing my backpack, I pulled out a fresh water bottle, and I offered it to the girl. "Here, I bet you're thirsty. Want some water?" But she just stood there, staring at me. "Okay, not right now. All right, we'll try again later." And then I looked down at Molly and said, "Let's go home, girl." She sniffed at the air and then headed into the forest, and we followed close behind. Twice more, we heard something huge walking through the trees, once from a distance and once much too close for comfort. We stayed silent and unmoving until the danger passed. We walked for hours, and I didn't tell them this, but I was sure that we would never find our way out. We eventually decided to sit down to rest, and I was once again trying to get the girl to take some water. Suddenly, Molly jumped to her feet, her head tilted to the side, like she was listening to something in the distance, and then she took off straight into the woods. I grabbed the girl's hand and we ran after her. Whenever Molly got too far ahead, she would stop and wait for us. She'd keep barking till we caught up. and then she'd take off running again. When I saw the rope tied around a tree I'd used for a marker, I breathed a huge sigh of relief. It was only a little farther till we reached the trail that led up and out of the valley. As we came out of the mist, I couldn't believe my eyes. "Chester," I mumbled. There was Park Ranger Chester Miles with a very relieved look on his face. He had a length of rope tied around his waist. "Jim, thank God. Come on," he said. "Hurry." I picked up the girl, and we made our way back up the path carved out of the cliff face. As we climbed, I told Chester about the hiker I saw in the valley. He said, well, he'll have to find his own way out. We're not going back there. The only reason you three got out is because Molly heard my emergency whistle. When we got to the top, Chester took off the rope and he tied it around the girl's waist. And then he told her to climb over the deadfall slowly and carefully. And we climbed up right behind her. I carried Molly under one arm. And when we made it to solid ground on the other side, we stopped to catch our breath. All of a sudden, I was incredibly thirsty. I pulled out one of the water bottles, gave one to the girl, and we both drank until the bottles were empty. Whoa, easy there. Don't want to make yourself sick now. A little at a time, Chester said, taking a sip from his canteen. "Jim, I see you and Molly have a new traveling companion. Now who have we here?" Chester asked. I just shook my head. "She hasn't said a word," I replied. "Oh, that's okay. Let's all get back to the fire tower and we'll figure things out from there." Chester replied with a smile, and Molly took the lead, with the girl following closely behind. "Chester," I said quietly, "if you've got your phone with you, call for an ambulance now because it'll take them an hour to reach us." Chester shook his head. "No calls." He pointed toward the girl. "Oh, explain later." I looked over at him, wondering what was going on, but I trusted Chester. He's a good guy. So I just nodded and kept walking. By the time we got back to the fire tower, the sun was setting. We were all exhausted. The girl refused to go more than 3 feet away from Molly, so we made a campfire in the clearing below the tower. We cooked up some food, and we set up a small tent for her and Molly to sleep in. Chester and I sat by the campfire, and we had a couple beers, and when we were sure the girl was sound asleep, I turned to him and asked, "So what the hell's going on?" "She needs to get checked by a doctor. And her family needs to be informed now." "How long do you think you've been gone?" Chester asked. "What does that have to do with anything?" I replied. "Just answer the question," he said. I sighed. "Okay, I don't know, I guess I was gone for 8 or 9 hours." And Chester shook his head. "You were gone for 4 days." "Okay, that's not funny, Chester." "I'm not laughing," he said. "When you didn't report in for 3 days after the storm, Kenny assumed that the storm knocked out the equipment again. You know, like it did last April. And with all the power outages and flooding, we had our hands full for the last few days. But when I heard Kenny mention that you hadn't called in, I dropped everything and I came right over. Because I knew exactly where you were." "How?" I started, but Chester cut me off again. No, let me finish," he said. "There's something wrong with that valley. I don't know exactly how to explain it, but let's just say it goes to another place. Not always, but sometimes. When I first started here as a new park ranger, about 6 months in, a couple of hikers disappeared. Boyfriend and girlfriend. They were heading down into the valley to camp for the weekend. And they never came back. There was a big search. It went on for over 3 weeks. Never found anything. Not a tent or a backpack or a shoe. Nothing. Like they just vanished clean off the earth. About a year later, a 12-year-old girl goes missing about 50 miles from here. Her name was Allison Beckett, if I remember correctly. Anyways, this search party was massive. Always when a child goes missing. There must have been 400 people out looking for her. They found nothing. 6 weeks later, 2 women were hiking through our valley, and they found her. Poor thing, huddled up against a tree. They brought her back, called her parents, and she was okay. But remember, she got lost 50 miles away. So how'd she end up here in the valley? Our mayor held a little celebration to thank the 2 women and present them an award. Allison and her family came down to attend. There was food and drink. Everybody was happy, and just for a moment, I happened to catch Allison sitting by herself at a picnic table. So I sat down and I asked her what really happened. She said that her family was hiking to a waterfall and her little brothers were arguing. Her parents stopped to separate them, and while they were stopped, Allison kept walking. She said she was tired of listening to her brothers argue. She went around a curve in the path, and off the side of the trail, about 50 feet into the woods, was a merry-go-round, a full-size merry-go-round with lights and music and everything. She said she stepped off the trail, walked over to it, and held out her hand. Allison said she just wanted to touch it, to see if it was real. And as soon as her hand touched the carousel, she was standing in a different forest, and everything was covered in mist. There were 3 more disappearances over the next 5 years, and that's when I decided to block off the trails that led to the valley. You did that? You made the deadfall? I asked. Yes, and I don't regret it because the disappearances fell off after that. I blocked off every entrance, and then I hid the trails leading to the valley as best I could. Things were pretty quiet here for a long time. But 4 years ago, a little boy went missing. His name was Jackson Perry. He was 6 years old at the time and began a massive search. Locals, reporters, even some people from out of state came to help. We looked everywhere, brought in search dogs too, and you better believe I searched those hidden trails. I even climbed up the deadfalls to look, but there was nothing there. 5 days later, I found him sitting at the base of that same deadfall that we climbed over today. I'd already looked there 3 times, so I checked him for broken bones. He looks okay, except for some, scrapes and bruises. I pick him up and carry him back to the search party, and while it's just me and Jackson, I ask him what happened. He says he was playing hide and seek with his sister, and he was hiding behind a big rock. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them, his sister was gone, and he was in the woods, and he couldn't see very far because there was smoke everywhere, like, when there's a fire. He got scared and started crying, and then he heard a big noise, kind of like a fire truck. He hurt his ears, he said. The ground started shaking, and then he says a giant picked him up and carried him over the trees. He said it was like flying. Jackson said he could see a long way, and then the giant just set him down on top of a big pile of sticks, and he climbed down and sat at the bottom. After a while, I came and found him, and when I brought him back to his parents, they rushed him to the hospital. The doctor said the only thing wrong with Jackson, other than some cuts and scratches, was a burst eardrum. The doctor said that could happen from being close to a loud blast of noise. I think Chester noticed that I went pale after that last story. He stopped to open another beer. Then I asked him the only question I could think of. But why don't you want to take the girl to the hospital? We got to find out who she is, I said. But I know who she is, Chester said quietly. Her name is Olivia Hernandez. She's 8 years old, and she went missing over 20 years ago. How? Years ago. I started again, but Chester interrupted me. You were gone for 4 days. Time is different over there. But how could you possibly know it's her? I said, because I looked for that girl for weeks. He started. I guess I never really stopped looking for her. I memorized her picture, and I recognized the Rugrats t-shirt she was wearing when she got lost. It's faded now, but it's the same shirt. Then I remember her father, Miguel. Long after they called off the search, he was up here searching side by side with me. Every weekend and every day off, he was out in those woods looking for Olivia. He said he knew she was still alive. He knew it. But 20 years? How could she survive? What did she do for food and water? And how did she keep away from the things that live over there? I asked. I don't know, Chester said. But at first light, I'm going back to base. I'll find contact info for her parents. They'll have kept it current. Parents of missing children always keep it current. I'll get them out here as fast as possible. I guarantee that if they're still breathing, they'll be here by tomorrow night. In the meantime, she stays here with you. And before you even think about arguing with me, let me tell you this. That little girl has been through more than we could ever imagine. If we take her in, there will have to be a report. The press will show up, and eventually they'll figure out her story doesn't make sense. They'll be all over her and her parents for months. It'll be a shit show. And if you need another reason, take a look at her sleeping with Molly. I think she feels safe for the first time in a long, long time. You want to take her away from Molly? Leave her at the hospital with a bunch of strangers? Let me go ahead and answer that for you. No. No, you don't. It's not right. Let her stay with Molly until her parents get here, and then they can decide what to do. He said. I thought for a moment about what had happened to me, and about what people would say if I told them what happened to me. They'd think I was crazy. And then I thought about Olivia. Chester was right to keep things quiet. Okay, I said. Olivia will stay here with me and Molly until you come back with her parents. I fell asleep in the chair by the fire, and by the time I woke up, Chester was already gone. He'd left a note under a rock by the chair. I'll be back by tonight was all it said. I spent the day watching Olivia play with Molly. And true to his word, by 5 that evening, Chester called to say he was waiting at the airport to pick up Olivia's mother, Maria Hernandez. I heard the truck pull up 2 hours later, and then they came walking up. As soon as I saw Maria, I knew it was Olivia's mother. I could see the resemblance in her face. She was very nervous as she asked, "Where is she?" I pointed to the clearing. Olivia was sitting with Molly and weaving dandelions into her collar. Maria gasped, "Oh my God, can this be real?" She whispered. She walked slowly towards the girl. "Olivia?" She whispered. Olivia stood looking at the woman for what felt like an eternity. And then she ran, throwing her arms around her mother, her little hand still clutching a flower. And then Maria was full on weeping, just holding Olivia tight. I had tears in my eyes too, and I looked over to see that Chester did too. I'll never forget that moment. After things calmed down, we all talked for a while. Maria thanked us over and over, saying she could never repay us for what we'd done. Olivia still hadn't spoken, but she held tight to her mom. Chester drove the mother and daughter to the airport. Maria wanted to bring Olivia back home to see her father as soon as possible. And after they were gone, I sat by the fire thinking about everything that had happened. Molly was sound asleep at my feet. Weeks went by and things settled back down. And then I got a call from Chester, asking if I wanted to meet for dinner in town. We met at the local diner. They had good burgers, and there was a patio out back that allowed dogs. After the waitress took our order, Chester said, "I got a letter today from Maria Hernandez. She said she wished we could have seen the look on her husband's face when he saw his daughter. It was like a huge weight he'd been carrying for 20 years had finally been lifted. She also said Olivia's coming out of her shell. She's talking again. And Maria said she took my advice about keeping things quiet. She just wanted her family back. In fact, she's homeschooling Olivia right now because she can't bear to be apart from her again. A few weeks ago, they took Olivia to the local dog shelter, and they let her pick out a puppy. And guess what she named it? Yep, Molly. And that little puppy sleeps with her every night. Maria also said that Olivia's birthday is next week, and she and her husband would be honored if we'd come celebrate with them. Because, well, they have a lot to celebrate right now." Chester looked at me and asked, "Well, so what do you think? You two are up for a road trip." "Always," I replied. And Molly looked up at the words road trip and woofed her agreement. After dinner, we walked out to the parking lot. Chester got in his truck, waved, and pulled out onto the road. And I just stood there for a minute, looking down at Molly. There was a family with a giant hole right through the heart of it. "And you patched it up, Molly. You did this." She stared up at me, head tilted to the side. I gave her a scratch behind the ears and I said, "Job well done, girl. Now let's go home. Ever since I was little, I could always do it." The first time I remember doing it, I think I was 3. My mom literally caught me with my hand in the cookie jar. I saw her marching up with her scary, angry mom face, and suddenly I stopped everything. Mom stood there, still with her angry face, mid-stride and her mouth open terrifyingly, as she'd been right in the middle of yelling something at me. Nothing moved. There was no sound other than the ringing in my ears, and I just knew. I'd stopped it all. I felt it. I just sort of flicked something in my mind, and time just stops. Once I was sure I was safe, I quickly scarfed down my cookie and swallowed it up before putting on my most innocent face and letting time resume. I told you no. I swear, Mommy, I didn't take a cookie. I licked the crumbs from my lips as covertly as I could. Mom looked confused for a second as she looked at me. Oh, I'm sorry, baby. I swore I saw a cookie in your hand. What are you doing near the cookie jar? I didn't completely escape that one, but I totally minimized the damage, and I got to eat a free cookie. That's sort of how I used it as I grew up. I learned pretty quickly that not everyone could stop the clock like I could. I also learned there are limits. When time is frozen, it's truly frozen. I can move about freely in a frozen world, but I can't move anything. People, objects, insects in flight, all of them are frozen in exactly the same spot as before, and no amount of force I exert can move them. I learned to be careful running around outside when I ran right into a bumblebee and knocked the wind right out of myself as it completely halted my excited sprinting. The next thing I learned was to wear thick shoes. When grass can't be moved, it becomes a field of spikes. I'm pretty sure I could stab myself with it if I tried hard enough. With a thick pair of shoes, I could carefully cross over well-manicured lawns. The more unruly ones I stayed away from. There are exceptions, sort of like the cookie. I was holding it when I first stopped time, so I was able to carry it with me and eat. My own clothes move with me, too. If I tried to grab another cookie, they'd have been like statues, stuck to wherever they were. Other people's clothes are like that, too. So I can't go undressing people while time is frozen, which I'm happy for in hindsight, but we'll talk about how bad I was as a teenager in a bit. For some reason, bringing objects into frozen time doesn't apply to people I'm touching. I can bring a cookie, but another person I'm touching just freezes up like everything else. I accidentally got my hand caught in the folds of my mother's skirt once because I froze time and it held me like a vice. That's the first rule. Nothing can be moved. The second rule is in order for time to start back up, I had to be pretty damn close to where I was when I first froze time. Otherwise, it feels like it's hard to explain. You know those video glitches on streaming services where it hiccups and stops for a few seconds, but then it rushes to catch up in the last few seconds of footage sort of speed by. It feels like that in my brain, like I'm desperately trying to push forward and catch up in my brain, but I literally can't until I'm back close to where I was when I started. I suppose I could also say it was like a skipping record, but I don't know how many people would get that these days. I don't have to be in the exact same position as I was at first, thankfully, just close. My mom says I had a tendency to dash away, and that I was weirdly fast at times, so other people might slightly notice some odd visuals as I stop and start, but since I'm close to my original spot, it's nothing they can't explain. I tried to show a friend once. I told him to watch an apple one was holding. I froze time and set it on the table, then started time again. He says to him, it looked like I just put it down really fast, so I tried again. This time I threw the apple in the air. Once it left my hand and rose an inch, froze like the rest of the world. My friend just saw me toss the apple in the air, so I tried it one more time. I picked up the apple, froze time, tried to set it down on the other side of the room, but then I couldn't start time again. Objects like the apple had to be close to their original position too. Thankfully, I could still pick it up. I never did find a surefire way to convince people I could freeze time. Not until I was older. Growing up with this ability, it was strange. I was a weird introvert already, and when you can stop time like a deity, you sort of develop a complex and further isolate yourself. I wasn't completely without friends, mind you. High school was hard. Puberty hit me like a freight train. Despite my parents being wonderful people who taught me about boundaries and respect, I made a conscious decision to ignore a lot of that in high school. I just as soon not mention any of my deviant behavior. But the thing is, I have to. I think that was the first time I saw it. One time, I went into the girls' locker room and froze. And as I stood there among my classmates, I came to a realization. They were a bunch of people just like me. Not only that, they were my classmates. I just felt like a dirty intruder, and that was suddenly a lot less exciting to me. I turned to leave, hoping to pretend this never happened, and that's when I saw a shadow on the wall. To this day, I have no clue whose shadow it was. It was frozen on the wall, like everything else, but I was transfixed by it. Who was casting this shadow? Why did it look so alien? I was utterly unnerved, so I hustled out of the showers, unfroze time, and I ran home scared and feeling very dirty as I should have. Somehow I shook off my terrible teens, and I became a more respectful person. I grew up, got a job, and I have a fiancé now. It's been 10 years since I used my time-freezing ability for anything nefarious. I still use the power from time to time. It's pretty handy at the few jobs I've had. It's also great for introverted nerds like me. If I need to get away, I can just freeze everything and go sit and stare at the sky for a few hours. In absolute silence. My fiancé believes that I can freeze time now, and here's how. We devised a test we could do. She wrote things onto a post-it note and placed it face down on a glass table while keeping her eyes on me sitting across the room. She'd tell me she was ready, and I would freeze time, crawl under the table, and read what she wrote before returning to my seat, unfreezing time and reciting what she'd written. She tried to talk me into other experiments, but I declined, and she respected that. I just wanted to live my life, so we did. That brings us to now. Something has changed. About a month ago, I froze in the middle of getting yelled at by my boss. I spent some time telling him where he could shove his citations and screaming obscenities before wandering the office for a time. I grinned when I saw I'd frozen a coworker in the midst of playing a game of solitaire when he was supposed to be working. I stopped to look out a window, staring at the frozen world outside, wrestling my anger under control, and preparing to return to my boss to let him finish his tirade. I walked past my solitaire-playing friend, and when I glanced at his computer screen, I noticed something off. It was turned off. At the time, I kind of just assumed I'd mixed up coworkers, so I sort of ignored it. When I got back to the boss's office, I swore his coffee mug was turned in a different direction. When I'd frozen time before, I could read the writing on his coffee mug. No one cares, work harder. Yeah, he's that kind of jerk. Now, from that position, all I saw was the black of the other side. This guy always keeps his mug face out to remind his underpaid underlings that they should be doing more for him. And also, I saw the freaking writing when I first froze at this moment. Why couldn't I see it now? I couldn't move the cup or anything, so what else could I do? I resumed time, and I let the idiot keep yelling at me. He made sure to turn his cup to tell me to work harder as I left the office. Out of curiosity, I checked in with my solitaire friend. His computer had crashed. The poor guy lost a really important report he was working on. He had to redo it. Not sure why he was playing solitaire. I convinced myself nothing was wrong, that I just made mistakes. Someone else was playing solitaire, and I just imagined I'd seen the words on the boss's coffee cup. But things like that have been happening more frequently. Small things I could easily miss. Every time I freeze time now, I'll notice something. At home, my toothbrush will move, or a book will be askew on the shelf. I was driving myself nuts with it. I kept trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid. Nothing can move when time is frozen. Nothing but me. But last week, something happened that's never happened before. I froze time so I could wander around outside. The frozen town proper is just sort of fascinating. I was strolling along, and all of a sudden, there it was. A noise? There was never any noise before. Even my own feet made no sound as I walked about with time frozen. But I heard it clear as day. It was a thump. It echoed out of some alley. I've never been so scared in my life. Time was frozen. I'd wandered through the statues of frozen people going about their day thousands of times. It had always been my space, my sanctuary. But now something else was here. How could anything make a sound if time was frozen? I ran. I bruised myself on a floating mosquito as I weaved through the frozen crowds. I'd never been afraid of the frozen people before, because I knew they couldn't do anything. But now any one of them could have made the noise. Maybe some were only pretending they were frozen. Who made that sound? Finally, I made it back to my original spot. I stood there panting, trying to start time back up so I wouldn't feel so alone. But for a brief moment, I couldn't move it. I glanced around with a sense of growing dread, and that's when I saw something else move around the frozen cityscape. It was only a shadow, just a flicker of some dark shape. It wasn't human. Its limbs were long, Its head almost looked like an egg, and there were white, empty half circles where eyes ought to be. Just white voids. It was the same shadow from the wall of the showers all those years ago. Somehow I knew that. And it wasn't frozen this time. Our eyes met, then everything started moving, and the shadow vanished. I started screaming right in the middle of a sidewalk. I refused to freeze time ever again. I hope that whatever that thing was, I left it trapped in that frozen moment. But who the hell knows? If I freeze time again, maybe it will be in the next frozen moment waiting for me. I don't think it's safe there anymore. My sanctuary is gone, but it can't reach me here, right? Well, I'm not so sure. My fiancée is now convinced our house is haunted. She says she keeps seeing a shadow man staring at her. Her possessions keep moving. Toiletries, knickknacks, some of her clothes. I tried to tell myself it wasn't the egghead. She thought it was a stalker at first. I rolled with that and started watching out for other clues. But then she saw the white eyes. She shrieked when it happened. She said she saw them at the foot of our bed. It happened again the next evening. We spent the day distracting ourselves, then the evening brainstorming ideas. Eventually, she left to take a shower while I looked for shadow figures online. Minutes after I heard the water shut off, I heard her scream. I froze time and ran to her. By some miracle, she hadn't closed the door as she dressed herself after her shower, so I was able to run right into the room. There she was. She dropped her towel and was recoiling in terror. She stood there frozen, reeling away, about to fall backwards. I followed her gaze. There was the egghead shadow. And it wasn't a shadow anymore. It stood there in a room, a living shadowy mass in a horrifically humanoid shape. Then it turned and looked at me with its empty white voids. It wasn't frozen. The next thing I knew, I couldn't move. I was as frozen as my fiancé, but I was still aware. I could only watch helplessly as its shadowy limb shuddered to life and it skulked towards her. It walked behind her, out of my sight. I heard it rummaging around. A minute later, I could move again. Time was still frozen. I scoured the house for that thing, but I couldn't find a trace. What the hell had it done? I returned to the bathroom and stared helplessly at my fiancée. She was going to fall. She'd slipped when she saw that thing. I moved towards where I saw the egghead, and that's where I found a pair of scissors. They sat right where the woman I loved was going to land. I tried to move them, but of course I couldn't. I tried moving her, but I couldn't do that either. I spent hours just trying to do something to this frozen moment so my fiancée wouldn't lose her life the second I started things up. I even tried taking off my shirt to put between her and the blade to minimize the damage, but I couldn't start time back up without my shirt. I felt so utterly helpless. With nothing else to do, I went back downstairs to restart time and sprinted up to the bedroom to aid my terrified fiancée. I already had emergency services on the way. I found her crying on the ground in an alarmingly large puddle of blood. She'd impaled her wrist on the scissors. She's in recovery now. I acted fast enough that they managed to save her. They closed the artery, and she's receiving donor blood. That thing put the scissors there. I know it. It tried to kill her. It's been 3 days since then. In that time, 3 different people have died mysteriously in our town. Bizarre accidents. 1 in a million chances that people could die in such bizarre ways. But so far, we've had 3. An older woman stumbled in such a way that she fell forward and the pins from a pencil cup went into her eye, straight through to her brain. A man stepped out of his pool and tripped over a misplaced pool float and landed on his fuse box in such a way that he'd been electrocuted. Apparently, it needed servicing that nobody knew about. A teenage boy on a skateboard was thrown into the street with his board smacked into a toy on the sidewalk that nobody could identify. He'd been hit by a car. That all happened in the last 2 days. Maybe it's all a coincidence. But I don't think so. I'm not sure what this thing is or where it came from. But it has control over time. More than I do even. And it seems to enjoy killing. I'll worry that I'm the one who called it here somehow. As far as I know, it's still out there. I'm going after it. I have to try and stop it. It might come back for the woman I love. It's more powerful than me. But maybe I just haven't figured out all that I can do. I'm sorry, Delilah. I hope I'll be back soon. For anyone who hadn't heard, my fiancé claims he can freeze time and that some sort of monster appeared from one of his frozen moments. He's been missing for 3 weeks now. I've been trying to find him since I got out of the hospital. I guess he forgot that he gave me his Reddit password. I finally found his story and his farewell. His name is Sean. He's a really sweet guy. We were going to get married sometime next year. I didn't know what to think about the ability he had. On some level, I think I always thought it was some kind of magic trick he could do. It bothered me a little that he seemed to really believe in it, though. But the thing was, I could never disprove it. I tried. I tried writing things on the other side of the house before asking him to go read them. And every time he'd look at me, smile, and recite what I'd written word for word, like he was just pulling it out of my head. If he could really freeze time, I have no idea what he's doing as a regular office worker. He works in accounting. If he could freeze time, shouldn't he be employed by the military as some sort of super spy? He also said there were too many limitations. I've clung to the idea that whatever he was doing, it wasn't freezing time. I mean, if he did, how come he can move through air molecules? How can he breathe and process oxygen? The physics make no sense. It had to be some kind of magic trick, right? For a while, it was just a quirk, but it started to get serious. First, he came home one day looking all kinds of flustered. He told me he saw something after he froze. Something that moved. He said he started screaming in the middle of town. I actually got a text from a friend who saw it happen, asking if he was okay, so he definitely screamed in public. Then he told me all about the egghead shadow. I'm pretty good at reading people. He was scared of something. But what could he have seen? If his powers were real, it's even scarier. What could possibly move between the frozen moments of one person and free-flowing time? Things went downhill after that. But you already know that. I started seeing the egghead. I never got a good look. It was always just a glimpse of an elongated limb in my periphery or a shadow flitting by a doorway. And it was all accompanied by a weird chill that would give me goosebumps and make me panic. Then things started moving. I'm telling you, I thought it was just in a typical ghost story after that. Or maybe I had some creepy stalker moving my things when I wasn't looking. Then one time, I swear a bottle of perfume I was looking directly at vanished before my eyes. It just blinked out of existence and left me wondering whether it had ever been there in the first place. Sean said he couldn't move things like that. So was it his egghead? Then came that night. That night, I truly saw the egghead for the first time. I saw it clearly. And it was even worse than Sean described. It was reaching for me with gangly limbs and elongated fingers. Those white voids where eyes would be seen to suck in the air around them. And there was a mouth. Just a little half-moon slit filled by the same white void as its eyes, which gave it this weird, frowny face. I screamed, fell, and almost died when I landed on a pair of scissors. Sean got me to the hospital. I remember him telling me he loved me. That was the last time I saw him. He was in contact for maybe a week. I kept trying to convince him to come home. His responses got erratic. Then they stopped. A day later, the egghead reappeared, right in my face. I stepped out of the shower, and there it was. Its flesh was like a black void, but its eyes were like empty holes leading to pure whiteness, just like Sean described. My body froze, but I was left aware as the thing took a wobbly step towards me. I couldn't move my eyes. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't do anything. Soon it was inches from me. I could taste it. Since I couldn't breathe, I couldn't smell it or anything, but its rank metallic aura poured over me all the same and stained my tongue. My tea tasted like death. I was forced to stare into its eyes, and I saw something in them. Something in the endless white. I'm trying to think of the words to describe what I saw, but I can't. There was a sudden crash and whirl of noises. Then suddenly I could move again, just like the first time I fell. No scissors were there to stab me this time. When I finally got my bearings, I found the egghead gone. And the house is empty. I wanted answers. I found my way to his Reddit page and read his account. I've been looking into things since. The number of fatal accidents keeps increasing. Does that mean Sean failed? Time is still moving and bad things are still happening. I was going to wait and hope that he'd contact me again. The last text he sent said, "I think I found it." Then nothing. I went to the police and filed a missing persons report and all. I've talked to his parents and friends. I had to tell them I didn't know what he's doing, which wasn't a lie. But I still omitted the part about the time of freezing shadow. I can't stay quiet now, though. Something is happening to me, and it's growing in intensity. It started as a headache. I figured it was distress. I almost died and my fiancé vanished soon after. My friends all think he stabbed me himself, and I'm covering for him. So of course I'm stressed. I wasn't surprised when I felt it the first time. It was almost like a scratching sensation. One happening inside my skull. It both was and wasn't physical. I almost felt like I could hear it for a few seconds. It sounded like rusty metal being dragged against more rusty metal, but maybe with a dash of something organic. A sort of wet squelch. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, and then my head started to throb. Like I said, I thought it was just a headache and ignored it. But it keeps happening. It almost seems to happen at random times. I haven't figured out a pattern yet. I'll just be staring into space. I've been doing a lot of that these days. And then all of a sudden I feel this scratching and my head throbs. I didn't think it was anything but stress until it happened while I was moving. I've never felt anything like it. Along with the headache and the scratching, it felt like I'd entered a cloud of molasses. I could barely move. And as I did move, it was way slower than it should have been. That was when I started to suspect it had something to do with Sean and that thing. I have no idea how. It makes no logical sense. Is time breaking down around me? Why do I even feel anything? If time stopped, why would I even be aware? As far as I can tell, time is just moving forward normally. I still don't know. It keeps happening. The last time it happened, my nose started bleeding. It's been 2 days. He's gone. I was frozen at some point. I was typing and my computer keys just stopped working. They suddenly felt as solid as steel and wouldn't move no matter how I pushed. I looked around and everything was frozen. It's just like Sean described, everything frozen in place. It was raining outside. The droplets were like little cold glass roadblocks. I couldn't move them. So I was trapped in the house, and that thing was there. It looked different. It wasn't as elongated, and I swear it was trying to talk to me, but it sounded like its voice was a million miles away. Or maybe a few moments in the past or future. It didn't seem malevolent. It kept gesturing at me. Its white eyes were wide circles. For a time, it looked like it was mimicking the motions of writing something on a piece of paper. When it tried to touch me, I swear something in the universe just broke. I'm back in the hospital. When that thing touched me, I was wrenched back to my original spot in my computer so fast and violently. I now have a concussion because I think my brain bounced around in my skull. Somehow, nothing else is physically wrong with me. I feel like the force should have ripped my limbs off. I only have a theory on what happened. I don't think that egghead was the same one I saw before. I think this one was Sean, and I think he was trying to communicate. It's possible he's been trying for a while, and that's what that scratching sensation was. I guess he figured out how to do different things with his ability. Maybe he could even pass forward or backward in time. But I think it took a physical toll on him. I think that's why he looked like an egghead. I don't know why he looked like a living shadow. But maybe he, smeared himself across time. Maybe the other egghead was someone else who tried to meddle even more. I haven't seen anything strange since I was frozen. There was, however, one more incident. Sean and an unknown man were both found dead in a local warehouse. Cause of death is unknown. Both bore strange burns on their bodies that nobody could identify. The people think they found a genetic link between the unknown man and someone else. That person is only 14 right now, but they've already got a rap sheet. I went to identify Sean's body. It was definitely him. He looks older than I remember. I don't know if that has something to do with his powers or not. My fiancé's gone. I think the thread is too. Are there more? How far do their powers go? I'm scared, and I wish Sean was here. Update. I know I haven't posted yet, but I found something. Sean left one last message. I'm not sure how. It was sitting on a table when I got home from the hospital. It was where that shadow looked like it was writing something. This is what Sean said. Dear Delilah, I don't know why I can do the things I do. I figured I was just a mutant or some shit, but I'm not the only one. The first one I saw came from the future. It learned how to turn back time, and it's wreaking havoc. Every time it moves something that shouldn't move, I feel it. It sounds like massive metal slabs grinding against each other. Every time someone dies, it becomes a cacophony. Whatever it's doing, something is breaking. I figured out how to do new things. It hurts. The only thing that doesn't hurt is what I used to do, where I just move around in a frozen moment. Anything else, it feels like it's stretching me. I think I understand now. It is stretching me. It's making me exist in multiple moments at once in the same universe. That's not supposed to be possible. That's why my skin is fading. That's why when I look into my reflection's eyes, I see those white voids. The other egghead was hiding in a single moment, but then it came after you. I chased it away, but I was following in that moment for what felt like years. I think he was toying with me. After all that time, the grating sound barely phases me, but I feel the effects getting worse. I finally figured out how to fight it, and I think I have it cornered. I froze in a moment, but I had to come back and try to say goodbye first. I love you, Delilah. And the only way I can think to stop this thing will kill me, too. I wish I could spend my life with you. But it's better this way. The fewer of us time manipulators there are, the better. I know that sounds like bullshit, but please understand. I've seen the void behind the egghead's eyes. It leads somewhere outside of time as we know it. Outside our universe. I've seen the things there that want to get in. I've seen the things there that want to get in. I hear them talking to me, trying to get me to meddle with time even more. I won't do it. I'm sorry, Delilah. And I'm sorry that I scared you. I'm an egghead now, too. Live your best life. And don't forget me. Yours forever. Sean, ever since my wife Adeline disappeared, it's been just me and Charlie all alone. I don't mind it. I've never cared much for company. If I'd wanted visitors, I wouldn't have tried to get as far away from civilization as I could. Now would I? Charlie's pit stops back at the house for food, sleep, and to deposit the presents he sometimes brings back are enough for me. In the meanwhile, I occupy my time with books and occasionally television. Adeline left behind more than her fair share of the former. She had a thing for mystery novels. I never used to take any interest in them, but nowadays, well, I suppose reading the ones I knew she enjoyed lets me feel close to her again. My daughter says I've gone crazy up here. I tell her that I've never been happier. I don't want to go back to the city and rot away in some old folks' home with a condescending nurse talking to me like I'm a child. I'm 85 and I'm as sharp as I ever was. Not quite as spry. No, but if anything really needs fixing, I have a telephone and I have the internet. I can call for help if I need it. I intend to live out my days here in this house, with the woods stretching endlessly on behind me. I'll breathe fresh air, relax in solitude, and wait for the Lord to tell me that my time is done. Until then, I'll do all I can to enjoy the time I have left on my terms. Of course, that said, my daughter Sarah still worries after me more than she ought to. I suppose I should find it sweet, but really it's a little annoying. I love her dearly, and I'm glad we raised her right, yada yada. But when I'm trying to read, I don't need her knocking on my door to fuss over me. I'm sitting in my chair on the porch. I have coffee and a sandwich. I'm not going anywhere. And even if I was, I'm hardly feeble. Regardless, she insists that I need company. I gave up fighting her on that. I figure she's doing it more for her own peace of mind than anything else. I was never there for my father in his twilight years. He and I weren't on speaking terms, and after he passed, Well, I suppose I'd wished one of us had had the balls to say one last nice thing. And I suppose I wished that it had been me. Besides, sometimes she brings me gifts. Not quite as fancy as the ones Charlie sometimes brings, but fancy in their own way. Cameras to monitor the outside so I can see who's coming from my tablet computer, and I suppose the tablet computer herself. I've adapted well enough to it all, I suppose. I like to think I've done so better than most people my age, and if I'm being honest, I like how easy the technology has made some things, even if they were the things I didn't really ask for in the first place. The other day, Sarah asked me if Charlie's long absences bothered me. I told her they didn't. Charlie has always been an outdoor cat. He's as much a creature of the forest as the birds and the squirrels. Adeline used to worry about him, since there's coyotes and bears out there, but I don't. I reckon that if Charlie made it this long without running into trouble, he knows what he's doing. And judging by the things he sometimes brought home, I got the impression he wasn't exactly in danger. It wasn't often, but every now and then when Charlie came back, he'd have some sort of trinket with him. Sometimes it was junk. Bottle caps, pieces of old cans, and whatnot. Sometimes he'd have coins, usually just small change. But every now and then, he'd have something a little more valuable. Jewelry and whatnot. Some of it was fake. A few pieces, though, they looked pretty real. I always kept the real-looking ones in a drawer in case anyone ever came looking for them. It didn't seem right to sell them. I figured that they'd probably been dropped somewhere in the woods by hikers and Charlie had found them. Either that or he was raiding some kind of garbage pile. It was hard to say for sure. Regardless, I got the vibe that he was staying out of trouble. Some cats are dumb. Charlie isn't. I've got more faith in that cat than I've had in most people. Still, Sarah had her question to ask. You don't wonder where he's going at all. I got the impression that she asked more out of genuine curiosity than anything else, and that told me she was trying to work her way up towards some kind of point. What that cat does is his business, I said. And you're not in the least bit curious, huh? All right, what did you buy? The sales pitch was getting a little bit annoying, and Sarah just smiled sheepishly. Okay, well, I just thought it might be fun, you know? But they've got these cameras. People wear them when they're biking and stuff. You can attach them right to your body. Isn't that neat? I suppose. I didn't really see the point to it, but I was playing along. It might be cool. It'll give you something to look at when it gets back. Truth be told, I thought the whole idea was a little stupid. But she got my attention, I suppose. Something in my gut told me that this was the sort of question that was going to keep me up. Besides, Sarah seemed pretty interested in it, and as much as my daughter can annoy me sometimes, I've never once been able to say no to my little girl, and I wasn't about to start now that she'd hit 50. I suppose. Charlie put up with those ridiculous sweaters your mother always put on him around Christmas time. He'll probably tolerate this too, and I don't imagine it'll do him any harm. It won't. It won't, trust me. This'll be fun, I promise. I could hear the years melting away in her voice, and beneath the lines of age and gray at her temples, I could see that same 2-year-old I'd not so begrudgingly sat and had imaginary tea with once upon a time. She split into a full grin and reached into her purse to take out the camera, which looked like a small gray box. She'd even bought a harness. The kids are going to love this too. They always ask about you and Charlie, you know. Oh, I'm sure they do, I replied. The kids must have been at least pushing 20 by now. I doubt they spared much of a thought towards what I was up to. But it was nice of her to lie to me, I guess. Looking at that harness and camera, the first thing that came to mind is Charlie is not going to be happy about this. But I kept that thought to myself. Aside from moderately annoying the poor cat a little bit, the whole idea seemed harmless enough. Besides, maybe we'd actually see something interesting when we looked back at the footage. Sarah, of course, showed me how to set everything up. She showed me how to access the video by myself, and I'd say I got the hang of it moderately quickly. I knew the steps at least, and if I got stuck, I could always call her. Then, after chatting for a while longer, she went home and let me return to my solitude. Charlie hadn't come back home yet, although he usually didn't show up until sundown. So I set everything aside and sat down to read a book, and at some point I fell asleep in my chair. When I woke up, it was dawn, and I could see Charlie sitting on the banister of the porch, right outside the window, so I knew he was there when I woke up. As soon as he saw me moving, he started meowing and pacing around. I picked myself up, stretched, and shuffled over to the door to let him in. He scurried indoors and went straight for the food bowl, and as he did, I noticed that he'd left me something on the deck. It gleamed brightly in the morning sun, and I slowly bent down to pick it up. It was a necklace. Judging by the tarnish on it, it was real silver. The chain looked broken, but the charm looked all right. It depicted a little heart. Nothing fancy, but it was something good for a lady, I suppose. No engravings on it. No sign of who it belonged to. It was likely that nobody would come looking for this, but I still took it to the sink to wash it off before I put it in the drawer with the rest. That drawer rattled with old rings, necklaces, earrings, and rare coins that Charlie had brought over the years. The old cat himself was going to town on his dry food bowl, as if he'd never seen food before in his life. I honestly felt a little bad for him, and I hoped he hadn't been waiting too long. I went to fetch some wet food for him, partially as an apology, and partially because I knew he'd start to get mouthy with me if I didn't give him a proper breakfast. I was too tired to listen to that old man bitch. Charlie's a good cat, despite his attitude. He's a graying Maine Coon with a mean face, although he always melted like butter in Adeline's hands. She was always inclined to baby him, but I always saw him as a fellow curmudgeon to pass the days with. I've never actually told anyone this, but I always imagined he'd have a bit of a southern drawl if he could talk, and that he'd sound a little bit like John Wayne. As soon as he heard me opening the wet food, he went right at my ankles expectantly, meowing and demanding his breakfast. I figured it wasn't wise to keep him waiting. I set the bowl down on the kitchen table and let him jump up to eat his fill while I started on my own breakfast. Charlie had a nap while I ate, sleeping in the armchair Adeline had once liked to sit in. I didn't bother him until around noon when I remembered that camera that Sarah had bought. I'd left it in the living room, and while I hadn't put too much thought into putting it on Charlie, the memory of the necklace I'd found that morning had got me thinking. Where's my old friend getting all that junk? Was he finding it? Stealing it? What? I suppose the camera was likely to answer that. Sarah had already piqued my curiosity as to where he went, but that posed a question that required a more immediate answer. Charlie was out cold, with that contented look cats have when they sleep, and he paid me no mind as I got up to fetch the camera. I read over the instructions again and played with it for a bit before I actually tried to set it up. I recorded a little snippet of footage of Charlie napping there on the couch and popped that into my computer to review. The quality of the camera seemed fairly nice. It was easy enough to access the files. Might as well go and make sure the harness fits. Charlie only gave some slight protest when I bothered him to put the harness on. I'd committed the sin of awakening him, although he gave me a pass despite clearly being grumpy. "Sorry, old timer," I said, before scratching him under the chin. I fastened the harness around him, then fitted the camera onto the chest. "Guess I'll be along for your next adventure, huh?" He just chirped at me and sniffed my fingers, then flopped back down to continue his rest. He didn't stay that way for long. Within the next 10 minutes or so, he was at the back door stretching and pacing, ready to set out on the road again. I checked to make sure his camera was on before setting him loose. "Happy trails, Pilgrim," I said under my breath as he scampered outside and bounded down the stairs. He stopped to look at me briefly before he took off into the forest, and I knew I probably wouldn't see him again until nightfall. Normally, I'd have been in bed by 9, considering I was up so early. But thinking about Charlie and what I'd find on his camera kept me up, and I couldn't help but feel the house was a little too quiet for a change. I put the TV on to try and distract myself, since reading hadn't quite done the trick. I poured myself a hard drink as well. No harm in that, I figured. It had been a while since I'd indulged. Not since Adeline's funeral. We'd buried an empty casket. There hadn't been a body. After 2 months of looking, there wasn't too much point in pretending as if she was ever coming back. My mind stayed sharp over the years. Adeline wasn't quite as lucky. Dementia ran in her family. We'd seen it happen to her mother. A slow, cruel decline. We both feared for years that it would happen to her too. Then, when we started seeing the signs, Neither of us acknowledged it, even when they became too large to ignore. Sarah was over constantly back then, doing what she could to help us out. Adeline was a strong-willed woman up until the end, though. Sarah suggested retirement homes, but neither of us wanted to go. She wasn't feeble. She and I had taken care of ourselves. We'd kept our health into our old age. We even went on walks through the trails out behind the house. Going into some home where they'd infantilize her, treat her as if she was less of a person just because she was old and sick. Take her out of the home she'd known for years. I couldn't do that to her. I didn't want to watch her go through that, and I would have been damned if I let her go without me. No, she was my wife, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. Those were the vows, and I would honor them until death. When I was a young man, in my 20s and looking to propose, the prospect of growing old together terrified me. I wouldn't give back the memories we made together. Not for anything. But back then, the idea of one day losing her, or of knowing the pain she might feel if she lost me, that thought would sometimes creep into the back of my mind. I'd always banish it, dismissing it as something to worry about in the future. Then, one morning I woke up to find the spot in the bed beside me empty, when I never saw her again. Then I had to accept that eventually it had come. The police suggested that she'd gone on a hike alone. She'd done that before when we were younger. I didn't argue with them. I imagine that's just what she did. She woke up, forgetting the years that had passed, looking out into the crisp morning air, and decided to enjoy it. She walked out, and she never came back in. Maybe she'd forgotten the trail, got turned around, and wandered deeper into the woods. Maybe she'd fallen, hurt herself, and never been found. Whatever ending had befallen her, I preferred not to think about it. It was better that I didn't know, even if not knowing was the cruelest thing in the world. Sarah was there for me, of course. I suppose it's why she doted on me so much in the year or so since. I wonder if deep down she fears that one day I'll follow Adeline into those woods, and she'll never see me again either. The scotch sat in my hands as I stared blankly at the TV, not really watching the infomercial on the screen. A flash of movement from the corner of my eye drew my attention and tore me away from my thoughts. Charlie paced on the back porch outside. The camera harness on him looked unharmed. I set my glass down and stood up to let him in. "Hey, you have a nice adventure, old-timer?" I asked. He just went straight for his food bowl. Dinner time. I let him gorge himself on dry food while I got a tin of wet food for him. That got his attention, and he hopped up onto the kitchen table to await his feast. "You're a spoiled cat, aren't you?" I asked. I'll bet if he could have responded, he'd have said something like, "You bet your ass, Pilgrim." As he ate, I took the camera off his chest and undid the harness. He seemed happy to have it off. The camera was a little bit dirtier and had stopped recording some time ago. I vaguely recalled Sarah saying something about the camera not having a hell of a lot of battery life. A couple of hours or something. I probably wouldn't have gotten the full adventure, but that was fine by me. I doubt I'd have missed anything that interesting. I was tired and wanted to sleep, but the camera called to me. I can't explain the sense of urgency I felt about looking at that footage. Maybe I was more bored with my routine than I thought, and at the very least, the footage might be somewhat interesting. I gave Charlie a pat on the head before deciding a cup of tea might give me the boost I needed to go through that footage. When all was said and done, Charlie had gotten comfortable in his favorite chair, and I'd retired with my hot tea to my office. I plugged the camera into my computer and took a sip of my drink. There were only a couple of videos stored on the camera. I recognized a few as the test videos I'd taken by the thumbnails. The last one, though, must have taken its thumbnail from a random point in the video. It looked almost pitch black, as if something were obscuring the camera. I frowned at the sight of it and hoped like hell the file wasn't messed up somehow. I'd have needed to call Sarah if it was, and who knew when she could make it out to see me. I clicked the video anyway, just to see what happened. I didn't expect it to start, but it did. I could see part of Charlie's head and my own jean-clad legs as I turned the camera on. I remembered this. This was just before I'd let him out. "Happy trails, Pilgrim." I heard myself say before the back door opened and Charlie was set loose upon the forest. What followed was some rather neat-looking footage, as Charlie skulked around some bushes and tall grass. But I can't really say it was all that interesting. He climbed some fallen branches and made his way into one of the neighbors' yards. He watched them for a little while, and even ate some treats they'd left out that seemed to be for him, a little glutton. Then he walked back off into the woods. I am sure at one point I saw him pass the hiking trail that Ada Lawn and I used to walk. I recognized a little creek that he walked along as he moved deeper into the forest. There was a familiar rustle of grass and water as he walked along, although the sound quickly became annoying, so I lowered the volume. I couldn't help but wonder just where the hell he was going out there, but I imagined he was probably just hunting. Maybe he'd kill a mouse or something. The canopy above him seemed to get a few shades darker as he climbed up onto a fallen birch tree. The loose bark crinkled under his paws. The tree seemed to lead up to another, taller tree. The canopy above was thick enough that it almost seemed like nighttime, despite it still being fairly early in the day. Looking at the timestamp of the video, he'd only been out for an hour and a bit. He moved along the branch of the taller tree, walking as if he knew where he was going. I could have sworn I caught a glimpse of something ahead of him. At a glance, it looked a bit like a bird's nest, although it seemed rather large. That said, I knew some birds like large nests. The longer I watched, the more glimpses I caught of the thing. It was definitely a nest of some sort. Twigs and leaves had been deliberately put together to form something, although this was bigger than any bird's nest I'd seen before. It seemed to completely dominate the top of one tree, and Charlie kept climbing as if he hadn't quite reached the top yet. Hell, I couldn't even see the sides of this thing. It seemed less like a nest and more like a wall of branches that seemed too big and too thick for a regular bird to lift. After a while, one of the branches that Charlie had climbed seemed to turn towards the nest. Getting closer, I could have sworn I saw bits of rope holding some of the larger sticks, or perhaps it would be more apt to call them branches together. I didn't get that good of a look, though. Charlie seemed to weave his way through a gap in the nest, creeping in as if he owned the place. The inside seemed pitch black. Charlie moved slowly, carefully, choosing each step as he drew closer. It was over a minute until there was any light again, long enough to make me check and see if the video had ended, but there was still about a half hour left. At last, he seemed to emerge onto the other side of whatever wall he just passed through. The light inside the nest was scarce. The interior was scattered with large black feathers, and I could see the sunlight glinting off bits of shiny things. Tin cans, children's toys, pocket watches, hood ornaments, jewelry. Was this where he was getting all that? What the hell was this? Some kind of massive crow's nest? I was hardly an expert on crows, but I couldn't imagine they'd ever make a nest that large. Charlie paused, as if looking or listening for something, before he continued. He paused to sniff a few pieces of discarded junk before casually making his way over to the far side of the nest. As he walked, I noticed the shapes of things that didn't quite look like branches or sticks. They were brownish in color and seemed to blend in easily, but the shape of them was all wrong. Branches don't have those smooth edges. Branches don't curve inwards on themselves. And branches don't have eye sockets. I could see the skull of some sort of animal, a large rodent of some kind, staring emptily from the interwoven branches. I could see bones with smaller twigs wrapped around them, used almost as additional support for the structure of the nest. And as Charlie walked, I saw something that made my heart begin to beat faster as a sick sensation filled my stomach. I've seen human skulls on TV, but never in real life. Had it not been for the matted black hair that still clung to the scalp, I might have been able to dismiss the idea that it was anyone else. But I knew that hair. I'd kissed that head 1,000 times, over a lifetime together. I remembered the laughing eyes in those now empty sockets. Even in death, I remembered. Recognized Maya Doolin, or what was left of Maya Doolin. How many of her bones had been added to this nest? Her body alone couldn't have been what became its foundation. How many others had been claimed as construction materials for this nest? Oh my God. Charlie sat reverently before Adeline's skull, and I knew that he recognized her too. He'd almost certainly come there to mourn, to pay his respects, or simply to be with her, even if she was long gone. I could only pray that whatever had done this to her had only taken her after she died. But from the gashes in the bone, I fear that wasn't the case. But what could have done something like this? What could have taken her? What could have? Charlie had been sitting quietly for almost 10 minutes as I placed my hands to my mouth, stifling my own cries of grief. And then he moved suddenly, as if something had startled him. From the speakers, I heard a raspy sound, an inhuman hiss that sounded like a cross between a sadistic cackle and the chattering of some large bird. Charlie scurried out of sight, moving between another gap in the branches of the nest before positioning himself to look back. Through the gaps in the branches and bones, I could see something else had entered the nest, although I couldn't fully see what it was. All I could see was two scaled legs that each ended with a four-toed claw, just like a bird of prey. It chittered and cackled as it approached the spot where Charlie had been, moving awkwardly as it hopped closer. I could see long black feathers trailing down from the creature's body as it continued to chitter. It seemed to inspect the spot where Charlie had been, and I heard him hiss. It didn't do much to deter the creature that was hunting for him, the creature that had likely killed my wife. I could hear the rustling of sticks, and the camera blurred as Charlie moved again to crawl out of the nest. He moved through the gaps in the branches as if he'd done this 1,000 times, and found his way onto a long branch that led down. Then he ran for freedom, and the very last shot I saw in that video was the blur of the ground beneath him. As the video ended, I couldn't help but notice Charlie in the doorway of my office. His eyes were wide and alert. His ears were raised, as if the sounds of whatever creature he'd encountered had frightened him. With a shaking hand, I coaxed him over to me, and he jumped up onto my desk. I'm not sure if he was there to protect me or if he wanted me to protect him. Either way, I was glad to have his company. I pulled the old man into my lap to hold him tight. It took a few minutes before he seemed to relax again. Lucky cat. I don't think I'll ever be able to relax again. I've rewatched the footage countless times by now. I haven't told Sarah anything. When she asked if I'd put the camera on Charlie yet, I told her I'd get around to it. She can never see what I've seen. She can never know what happened to her mother. Never. But I'm not foolish enough to delete that footage. If proof is ever needed, it needs to be accessible. To Sarah, or to anyone else who may need it should I not return from the woods today. I haven't hunted in years, but I dusted off my old rifle from the garage. It still works fine, and I've got bullets. I don't know if I'm half the shot I used to be. It's one thing to hit a few tin cans out in the backyard. It's another to hit a moving target. But I'm sure I'll manage one way or another. I'm sure I can follow the path that Charlie took. Not exactly, but close enough. I'm sure that if I go out into the woods, but close enough. I'm sure that if I go out into the woods, I can find the nest. I can find whatever horrible thing lives there. And when I do, by God, I will kill it. For Adeline.